Hey everyone, I'm Peter Stories here to guide you today. If you use this video to drift off to sleep, please tap like, hit subscribe, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. Now settle in, get cozy, and let yourself relax. The footprint was changing while James Whitmore watched it. He'd crouched beside the track in soft mud for maybe 15 seconds, photographing it with his phone for the incident report. A clear human barefoot impression, toes splayed, approximately size 9 women's. Fresh. The edges were still wet, collapsing inward as water seeped into the depression. Then the toes began to elongate. James blinked, certain he was seeing things. Heat exhaustion, probably. It was 94 degrees at 7 a.m., humidity pushing 90%. His first month as a ranger with the National Park Service in South Florida in August was proving more brutal than his training had prepared him for. But the footprint continued transforming. The toes stretched, separated, became distinct digits. The heel narrowed. The arch deepened. James watched the mud itself reshape, as if an invisible hand was sculpting it into something new. In 30 seconds, the human footprint had become something else entirely. Alligator. A perfect American alligator track, complete with claw marks. James jerked backward, landing on his ass in the swamp water. His phone flew from his hand, splashing into water thick with tannins. He scrambled for it, came up with the device dripping but still functional. His hands shook as he pulled up the photos he'd just taken. The first image showed the human footprint clearly. The second, taken maybe 10 seconds later, showed the same print mid-transformation, toes elongating, shape distorting. The third showed the alligator track. His phone had documented the impossible. James sat in ankle-deep water, soaked through, staring at photographs that violated every principle of physical reality. Footprints didn't change. Mud didn't reshape itself. Biology didn't work like this. Except he'd watched it happen. Megan Price had been missing for 18 hours. Last known position, Turner River Observation Platform mile marker 3.2 on the Loop Road. She'd been conducting a solo bird survey, standard work for experienced rangers. Megan had 7 years with NPS, 3 of them at Everglades. She knew the park, knew the dangers, knew protocol. She'd vanished anyway. James had volunteered for the search, partially because all available staff were required during SR operations, partially because sitting at headquarters felt cowardly. He'd been assigned the easiest sector, the marked trail along Turner River, where Megan's official route should have kept her on maintained boardwalk. Instead, he'd found this track half a mile off trail, deep in sawgrass prairie where no ranger should have been walking barefoot, where no human should have been walking at all. James forced himself to stand, water streaming from his khaki uniform. The Everglades pressed against him from all directions, sawgrass stretching to the horizon, broken by hardwood hammocks and mangrove thickets. The morning sun was already vicious, turning the swamp into a steam bath. Mosquitoes swarmed, attracted to his sweat and carbon dioxide. He'd applied DEET twice already, but the insects here treated repellent as a suggestion. 27 days ago, James had graduated from the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center. 26 days ago, he'd received his assignment to Everglades National Park. 25 days ago, he'd arrived in Florida thinking his biology degree from Penn State had prepared him for field work. He'd been catastrophically wrong. The Everglades wasn't a park in the traditional sense. It was an ecosystem that happened to have boundaries on a map. A river of grass flowing imperceptibly from Lake Okeechobee to Florida Bay, a place where water and land merged into something between, where the line separating solid ground from liquid became negotiable, where apparently the line separating human from animal was equally flexible. James pulled out his Garmin GPS, checking his coordinates. 25.547 DN, 81.0234 degree W. He was 0.3 of a mile from the marked trail. Easy enough to navigate back, except the transforming footprint suggested Megan had gone deeper into the backcountry, into areas where trail meant theoretical paths through sawgrass that could slice exposed skin to ribbons. Protocol said, report anomalies immediately. Return to designated search area. Let experienced rangers handle deviations. But James was the only searcher in this sector. The rest of the team was spread across 30 square miles of swamp, each following their assigned grids. And something about that transforming footprint made him certain, with the irrational certainty of prey-sensing predators, that reporting this would waste time Megan didn't have. If she was still alive. If that had been her footprint before it changed. James started walking deeper into the swamp. The sawgrass closed around him immediately. Each blade was edged with silica, sharp enough to cut through fabric. James kept his arms close, watching where he placed his feet. The ground was deceptive. What looked solid could be floating vegetation. What looked like water could be unexpectedly deep. Alligators were everywhere, though most stayed submerged, visible only as knobby eyes and nostrils breaking the surface. He'd been terrified of alligators during his first week. Now they were just part of the landscape, dangerous but predictable. They avoided humans unless provoked or protecting nests. Other things in the Everglades were less predictable. James found the second track 50 yards farther in. Another human footprint, left foot this time. Same size, same fresh appearance. He photographed it quickly, not wanting to watch if it transformed. It transformed anyway. The print shifted through multiple forms in rapid succession. Human, alligator, wading bird, something James didn't recognize with too many toes arranged in a radial pattern. The mud bubbled like it was boiling, shapes emerging and dissolving, finally settling on a panther track. A Florida panther, endangered, rarely seen, certainly not supposed to be this far south. James backed away, his heart hammering. This wasn't heat exhaustion, wasn't hallucination. The tracks were real, documented, impossible. Something was out here that could change shape, or something was making him see shapes that weren't real. Either option was terrifying. His radio crackled. All units, this is base. Update on search progress? James grabbed the radio, thumb on the transmit button. He should report this, should call for backup, for senior rangers, for someone who knew what the hell was happening. Instead, he heard himself say, Whitmore, Sector 7. No contact yet. Continuing search pattern. Why had he lied? Because they'd pull him off the search. Would assume heat stroke or psychological stress. Would send him back to headquarters for observation while someone else, someone experienced, someone who hadn't just graduated, would take over his sector. And somehow James knew that would be exactly the wrong response. Whatever was happening required someone who'd seen the impossible. Required someone whose worldview was still flexible enough to accept that reality had more variations than training manuals acknowledged. Required someone desperate enough to prove himself that he'd follow transforming footprints into the heart of America's most inhospitable wilderness. James kept walking. The landscape changed as he moved deeper. The sawgrass gave way to cypress swamp, ancient trees rising from black water, their knees jutting up like teeth. Spanish moss hung from branches in gray curtains. The canopy blocked direct sunlight, creating a green twilight that felt prehistoric. Sounds were different here. The constant buzz of insects intensified. Bird calls echoed strangely, coming from directions that made no acoustic sense. And underneath everything, a deep thrumming, like a massive heart beating slowly in the earth. James had read about that phenomenon during orientation. The Everglades produced infrasound, frequencies below human hearing range but perceptible as vibration. Natural causes, wind through vegetation, water flowing through limestone, atmospheric pressure changes, nothing supernatural. Except the rhythm felt intentional, felt like something breathing. The tracks continued leading him deeper, sometimes human, sometimes animal, sometimes impossible combinations. James photographed each one, building evidence that would either prove he'd discovered something extraordinary or prove he'd lost his mind. He found Megan's ranger hat floating in a cypress pool. James waded in, retrieving it carefully. The NPS emblem was intact, the sweat-stained interior clearly shaped to someone's specific head. Megan's name was written on the label in permanent marker. No blood, no tears, no sign of violence. Just a hat, discarded in water that was unnaturally still despite the breeze moving through the cypress canopy above. James turned the hat slowly, looking for additional clues. Something small fell from the brim, splashing into the water. He grabbed for it, came up with a tooth. Human molar. Adult. The root was intact, suggesting it had been pulled rather than broken. James's stomach lurched. He dropped the tooth, watching it sink into black water. Megan's dental records would confirm or deny, but he already knew. Somehow, he knew. The tracks had been hers, before they changed. Jesus Christ, James whispered. The swamp answered with sudden silence. Every insect, every bird, every ambient sound cut off simultaneously. The absence was so complete that James heard his own heartbeat, loud and panicked. Then the splashing started. Something large was moving through the water. Multiple somethings. James spun, trying to locate the source. Cypress trees blocked his sight lines. The splashing came from everywhere and nowhere, echoing through the swamp. His hand found his service weapon, a Glock 19, which he'd fired maybe 30 times during qualification, against paper targets. In controlled conditions, he'd never drawn it in the field. James pulled the Glock free, his hand steadier than he'd expected. The weapon felt inadequate. What did you shoot at when you didn't know if the threat was animal, human, or something that could be both? The splashing stopped. In the renewed silence, James heard breathing. Close, maybe 10 feet away, hidden behind a curtain of Spanish moss. Megan? His voice cracked. Megan Price? It's Ranger Whitmore. I'm here to help. The breathing continued, too deep for human lungs, too rhythmic. James raised his Glock, pointing it toward the sound. Identify yourself. This is the National Park Service. You are required to... The moss parted. What emerged was approximately human-shaped. Approximately. It walked on 2 legs, yes, but the legs bent wrong, digitigrade like an animal's. The torso was too long, ribs visible through skin that looked like leather stretched over bone. Arms hung to its knees, ending in hands that had too many fingers, each tipped with a curved claw. The head was worst. It wore a face like a mask, human features somehow sitting on top of something that wasn't human. Megan Price's face, specifically. James recognized her from the staff photo in the headquarters break room. But the face didn't move right, didn't align with the skull beneath. And the eyes. The eyes were golden, slit-pupiled, reptilian. The thing tilted its head, studying James. Then it smiled with Megan's mouth, revealing teeth that were absolutely not human. James fired. The shot was pure panic, no aim. The bullet took the creature in the shoulder, punching through with a wet sound. No blood, just a hole that closed almost immediately, skin knitting together like time-lapse footage of healing. The creature's smile widened. Then it changed. The transformation was fluid, seamless. One moment, a humanoid nightmare wearing Megan's face. The next, an alligator, 12 feet long, easily 900 pounds. The gator lunged with speed that shouldn't have been possible for its mass. James ran. He crashed through the cypress swamp, abandoning any attempt at navigation. Behind him, splashing, crashing, the sound of a massive predator in pursuit. Ahead, more swamp, endless swamp, nowhere to hide. His boot caught a cypress knee. James went down hard, face first into black water. He came up gasping, spitting out water that tasted of rot and chemicals. The alligator was 30 feet away, closing fast. James scrambled onto a fallen log, knowing it wouldn't help. Alligators could climb, could run 35 miles per hour in short bursts, could kill him a dozen different ways. The alligator stopped at the log's base, looked up at him with those golden, slit-pupiled eyes that didn't belong in any gator James had ever seen. Then it transformed again. The shape that emerged was smaller, more compact. A Florida panther, tawny coat soaked dark with swamp water. The panther's eyes remained gold, unchanged. It opened its mouth and Megan Price's voice emerged. "Run harder, James." Then it was gone, vanishing into the undergrowth with impossible silence. James stayed on the log for 5 full minutes, weapon trained on the spot where the panther had disappeared. His entire body shook. His breathing came in ragged gasps. Every shadow looked like predator. Every sound suggested attack. Finally, his radio crackled. All units, be advised. Evidence suggests Megan Price may have been exposed to unknown substance. Exercise extreme caution if contact is made. Do not approach alone. Repeat, do not approach alone. Too late for that. James keyed his radio with trembling hands. Base, this is Whitmore. I've had contact with something in Sector 7. Requesting immediate backup. Static. Then, Whitmore, specify nature of contact. How could he specify? How could he explain that he'd watched footprints transform? That he'd seen something wearing Megan's face shift between forms like changing clothes? That reality itself was negotiable in this swamp. Unknown hostile, James said finally. Possibly Megan Price. Possibly. I don't know what. It can change shape. It spoke to me. Long silence. James could imagine the conversation happening at base. New guy. First month. Heat exhaustion. Psychological stress. Pull him out. Send experienced rangers to confirm. Whitmore. Return to base immediately. We're sending a team to your last coordinates. Negative, James heard himself say. I'm tracking the subject. It's moving deeper into backcountry. If I lose the trail, Ranger Whitmore, that is a direct order. Return to base now. James turned off his radio. He was committing career suicide. Probably literal suicide, but something in Megan's voice when she'd spoken through the Panther's mouth, something desperate, something terrified, convinced him that leaving meant abandoning her to whatever was happening. If any part of Megan Price remained in that shape-shifting nightmare, James couldn't leave her. He climbed down from the log and started tracking. The panther prints were easy to follow in the soft mud. They led east, deeper into the park's interior, away from any maintained trails or ranger stations. James checked his GPS periodically. His coordinates were taking him toward the heart of Shark River Slough, where the Everglades was at its most primordial. The sun climbed higher. Temperature pushed toward 100 degrees. James's water was running low. He'd brought 2 liters, consumed 1 already. Dehydration was becoming a real threat, but turning back felt impossible. The landscape shifted again. The cypress gave way to mangrove swamp, a tangle of prop roots and aerial roots creating a 3-dimensional maze. The water here was brackish, tidal. James could taste salt in the humid air. The panther tracks stopped at a mangrove thicket so dense it looked impenetrable. James circled it, looking for another way through. Nothing. The tracks led directly into the mangroves and didn't emerge on the other side. Whatever he was tracking had gone in and stayed in, or was waiting inside. James studied the thicket. The roots created gaps large enough to crawl through. Barely. It would be tight, claustrophobic, impossible to move quickly. If the creature attacked while he was inside, he'd have no room to fight or flee. Every instinct screamed not to enter. James entered anyway. The mangroves swallowed him immediately. The prop roots created a tunnel of sorts, winding through the thicket. James crawled on hands and knees, his Glock holstered, both hands needed for navigation. The air was thick, saturated. Water dripped constantly from above. Things moved in the shadows. Crabs, probably, or small fish. Probably. The tunnel widened into a chamber. James emerged into a space maybe 20 feet across, created by the way the mangrove roots had grown. The canopy overhead was so dense that only fragments of light penetrated. The chamber floor was thick mud, covered in bones. Animal bones, mostly. James recognized deer skulls, raccoon jaws, bird skeletons, but also human remains. A skull with teeth still intact, ribs arranged in patterns that looked deliberate, femurs crossed in configurations that suggested ritual. This was a feeding ground, or a shrine. James was trying to decide which interpretation was worse when he saw Megan Price. She sat against the far wall of the chamber, knees pulled to her chest, still wearing her NPS uniform. Completely human, completely normal, except for the eyes. Golden, slit-pupiled. Wrong. You shouldn't have followed, she said. Her voice was her own. not the distorted version that had emerged from the panther. I came to help. James's hand moved toward his weapon, stopped. Would shooting help? Could bullets even affect whatever Megan had become? No one can help. Megan gestured at the bones surrounding her. This is what happens. This is what it does. What does? The Yinald Lushi. Megan pronounced it carefully, emphasizing syllables. Skinwalker, Navajo witch, except it's not Navajo, not originally. It's something older. Something that was here before humans, that learned to wear human form the way we wear clothes. James's anthropology minor had covered skinwalker legends briefly. Witches who violated cultural taboos gained power to transform into animals, specifically Navajo tradition, specifically Southwest tribal nations. This was South Florida. Wrong geography entirely. Skinwalkers aren't real, James said, not believing his own words, not after what he'd seen. They're very real. Megan's smile was bitter. And they're not geographically limited. That's white man's categorization. Indigenous peoples across continents have versions of the same story because they're describing the same thing. Creatures that can wear any skin, that can be anything they want. What happened to you? I found one of its skins, out in the sawgrass. Looked like an alligator hide, but wrong. Too fresh, too perfect. I touched it. Megan held up her hands. The skin was darker than it should be, patterned with scales visible just beneath the surface. It got inside me, started changing me from within. We can get you medical help. There are treatments. For what? Megan laughed. For infection by ancient shape-shifting entity? There's no treatment, James. There's only transformation, only becoming what it wants me to become. Fight it. I am fighting. That's why I ran. That's why I'm here, in this place it made, instead of at headquarters infecting others. Megan's eyes, those terrible golden eyes, met his. It's hungry, always hungry, and it spreads through contact, through touch, through fluid exchange. James backed toward the tunnel entrance. You're saying it's contagious? Extremely. Why do you think I'm quarantining myself in a mangrove thicket 12 miles from civilization? Megan stood slowly. You need to leave. Now, before I can't control it anymore. I can't leave you here. Yes, you can. You have to. Megan's voice was urgent. It's strongest at night. When darkness comes, I won't be able to resist. I'll become what it wants. A perfect predator, spreading to every human I can reach. You need to be far away before then. James checked his watch. 2:47 p.m. Sunset was around 7:30, less than 5 hours. There has to be another way. There is. Megan's expression hardened. Kill me. Put 3 rounds in my head. Burn the body. Salt the earth. That's the traditional method for dealing with skinwalkers. James's hand went to his Glock. Could he do that? Shoot a fellow ranger, someone who was still partly human, still aware enough to ask for death? I can't, he said. You'll have to eventually. Better now, while I'm still me enough to consent. Megan took a step forward. Her movements were strange, joints bending slightly wrong. Or you can run, let me transform completely, and deal with something that can become anything. Your choice, rookie. The term stung. James had been trying so hard not to be the incompetent new guy, and now his first major decision was whether to execute a colleague or abandon her to literal monsters. His training at FLETC hadn't covered this scenario. What if there's a cure? James said. What if we can reverse the transformation? There isn't. The old stories all agree. Once you wear the skin, you become the skin. No reversals, no redemption. Megan's voice broke. Please, James, while I can still ask, while it's still mercy instead of murder. James raised his weapon. Megan stood still, accepting, eyes closed. His finger found the trigger. He couldn't do it. James lowered the Glock. There has to be another way. Megan's eyes opened, fully golden now, the last traces of human color consumed. Then you've killed us both, she lunged. The transformation mid-leap was complete. Megan became panther, became alligator, became something James had no name for, all teeth and claws and hunger. He fired wildly, backing toward the tunnel. Bullets passed through the creature without effect, or struck and healed instantly, or missed entirely in the chaos. James dove into the mangrove tunnel, crawling desperately. Behind him, sounds of pursuit, crashing, the creature too large to fit but trying anyway. The roots groaned under its weight. He emerged from the thicket, sprinted 20 yards and turned back. The creature was stuck. Its current form, some impossible combination of multiple predators, was wedged in the mangrove roots. It thrashed, roaring with voices that included Megan's screaming mixed with animal sounds. James could run now, could escape while it was trapped, could make it back to headquarters, report everything, let someone else handle this nightmare, or he could end it. His remaining ammunition, 11 rounds, the creature's weak point, unknown. His chances of success, minimal. James started firing. He aimed for the head, for the eyes, for anything that looked vital. The creature screamed, pulling itself deeper into the mangrove roots. Each bullet wound closed immediately, but the creature was trying to escape rather than attack. Maybe it could be hurt. Maybe enough damage would... The Glock clicked empty. James stared at the useless weapon. The creature was still alive, still struggling in the mangroves, still wearing fragments of Megan's face when its form cycled through human. He'd failed. James turned to run and nearly collided with the old woman. She appeared from nowhere, or had been standing there all along and he'd somehow missed her. Ancient, skin like weathered leather, wearing clothes that looked handmade from palmetto fiber and alligator hide. Her eyes were filmed with cataracts but somehow still seeing everything. "Ye nald Lucy," she said, her accent suggesting English wasn't her first language. "You know what you face?" "Skinwalker," James gasped. It took Megan. It's spreading. Not spreading, calling. The old woman moved past him, approaching the trapped creature with no apparent fear. This one was bait, meant to bring others, meant to bring you. Me specifically? New blood, untrained, susceptible. The old woman pulled something from her clothes, a pouch made of what looked like deer hide. It seeks those who don't yet know the rules, who might touch what shouldn't be touched. I haven't touched anything, but you will. The old woman opened the pouch and James smelled something acrid. Unless you choose now. Choose to burn what must be burned. She threw the pouch's contents at the trapped creature. The powder, ash maybe, or ground bone, struck the thing wearing Megan's face. Where it touched, smoke rose. Real smoke, not the steam of evaporating swamp water. The creature shrieked, thrashing harder. Corpora, the old woman said, ground bone of its previous victims, mixed with cedar ash and salt. Only thing that burns them true. The creature was igniting, actually burning despite being soaked with swamp water. The flames were wrong colors, green and purple and blue-white. They spread across its shifting form, burning through each shape it tried to assume. Megan's voice emerged one final time. "Thank you." Then she was gone. The creature collapsed into ash that the Everglades water claimed immediately, dissolving into nothing. James stood paralyzed. The old woman turned to him. "You will not speak of this," she said. Not a question, a command. "I have to report. You will report that Megan Price was killed by alligator, that you found her body too damaged to recover, that you barely escaped yourself." The old woman's filmed eyes fixed on his face. "The truth serves nothing, cannot be proven, will only mark you as mad. Who are you?" "Calusa. We were here before Spanish, before Seminole, before park rangers drew maps and called this place protected." She gestured at the swamp surrounding them. "We knew what lived in the water, what walked in skins. We learned how to fight them." "How many are there?" "Fewer now. Salt water burns them eventually, Coral calcium in the limestone poisons them slowly, but they endure. They wait. They take those foolish enough to touch what shouldn't be touched. She pressed something into James's hand, another pouch, identical to the one she'd used. For next time. There'll be a next time. You saw one, you fought one, you survived. The old woman smiled without humor. They remember. They will test you again. Then she was gone. Actually gone. James spun in a circle, searching. Nothing. Just mangroves and water in the growing shadows of late afternoon. He looked at the pouch in his hand, felt its weight, felt the responsibility it represented. James started the long walk back to headquarters. The story he told was simple. He'd found evidence Megan Price had been attacked by an alligator in Sector 7. Her body had been too badly damaged and partially submerged to recover safely alone. He'd marked the coordinates for a recovery team. They believed him. Why wouldn't they? Alligator attacks were rare but not impossible. Megan had been working alone, had somehow ended up off trail, had encountered the wrong gator at the wrong time. Tragic. Unfortunate. Case closed. James kept the photographs on his phone. The transforming footprints, the impossible tracks. He showed them to no one. What would be the point? They could be dismissed as phone malfunction, as heat exhaustion hallucinations, as rookie panic. He kept the pouch the old woman had given him. Carried it always, just in case. 3 weeks later, James was conducting a routine patrol near Pahayoki Overlook when he found another track. Human barefoot, fresh, starting to transform as he watched. He pulled out the pouch. This time he was ready. The Everglades stretched around him, vast and ancient and full of things that maps didn't acknowledge. Things that wore skins. Things that waited for those foolish enough to believe park boundaries meant safety. James Whitmore was a rookie no longer. He'd learned the real rules. And he knew his job now went far beyond what the National Park Service manual described. The swamp had always needed guardians. Not against poachers or litterbugs or unauthorized camping. Against what lived in the spaces between forms. What wore stolen faces. What the old maps labeled as dragons and the new maps pretended didn't exist. James walked into the sawgrass, pouch in hand, ready to burn what must be burned. The Everglades breathed around him, patient and hungry and eternal. And somewhere in the distance, something howled with voices that were almost human. Almost. Hope you felt genuine terror. If you appreciate authentic horror rooted in real folklore, consider following for more stories. Which moment scared you most? Share your theory about what happened. The blood on the petroglyphs was fresh. Nicole Valdez could smell the copper tang from 20 feet away, but the rock carvings themselves were 800 years old. She stood at the base of the sandstone cliff in Boquillas Canyon, staring up at the ancient symbols that had survived centuries of desert wind and sun. The carvings depicted the familiar iconography of the Jornada Mogollon people. Spirals representing water, handprints marking presence, zoomorphic figures that might be bighorn sheep or spiritual beings. Nicole had led interpretive tours past these very petroglyphs dozens of times, explaining to tourists how indigenous peoples had used this site for ceremonies long before Big Bend became a national park. None of those tours had mentioned that the carvings could bleed. The blood was concentrated in the spiral patterns, filling the carved grooves like someone had carefully painted them, the red standing out vivid against the pale sandstone. But it wasn't paint. Nicole's sensitivity, the thing she'd tried to suppress with medication and therapy since she was 8 years old, screamed at her that this was human blood, ritually applied, still warm from a living body. She'd felt the wrongness the moment she'd crossed into Boquillas Canyon at dawn, a pressure in the air, dense and expectant, like the desert itself was holding its breath. The normal sounds, wind through Ocotillo, the distant call of a canyon wren, were absent. Even the sun felt different, its heat aggressive rather than neutral, like it was watching her with hostile intent. Nicole pulled out her park-issued Nikon D90 and photographed the bleeding petroglyphs from multiple angles. her hands steady despite the nausea rising in her throat. Then she checked her iPhone. 1 bar of signal, enough to text but not call. She typed quickly to Ranger Station in Panther Junction. Found evidence at Boquillas Canyon petroglyphs. Need immediate backup. Possible crime scene. The response came back within seconds. Backup unavailable. Flash flood warning in effect for Chisos Basin. All personnel responding. Can you wait until 1400 hours? Nicole checked her watch. 7:23 a.m. 6.5 hours until backup arrived. She looked up at the bleeding symbols, then at the canyon stretching deeper into the desert, and her sensitivity pulsed with the certainty that waiting would be a mistake. Because this wasn't random vandalism. This was connected to Sophia Carr. Sophia Carr, 26, graduate student in religious anthropology from UT Austin, had disappeared 4 days ago while researching indigenous ceremonial sites in Big Bend. Her rental car had been found at the Rio Grande Village, doors locked, camping gear untouched. Her laptop was open in the passenger seat, battery dead, last document titled, Patterns of Disappearance, Big Bend, 1990-2011. Nicole had read that document yesterday, after the sheriff's department forwarded Sophia's research files. What she'd found had made her blood run cold. 23 people had disappeared in Big Bend National Park over the past 21 years. Not unusual for a park this size. 8,000 square miles of desert and mountains, temperatures that could kill in hours, terrain that could swallow whole hiking parties. But Sophia had noticed something the official reports missed. The disappearances clustered around specific dates, solstices, equinoxes, and dates that corresponded to ancient Mesoamerican calendar systems, the Tzolk'in, the Hab, ceremonial days sacred to gods whose names Sophia had documented in careful footnotes. Tlaloc, Tezcatlipoca, Sipe Totec, gods that required blood sacrifice. Nicole followed the blood trail, because that's what it was, not random marks, but a deliberate path, droplets leading from the petroglyphs deeper into Boquillas Canyon. Her boots crunched on caliche soil, and sweat already beaded on her forehead despite the early hour. By noon, temperatures would hit 105 degrees. By sunset, maybe 95. Big Bend in late June was an oven, and Boquillas Canyon was one of its deepest chambers. The sensitivity that had plagued Nicole since childhood intensified with each step. She'd learned to describe it to the few people she trusted, like having an extra sense that detected wrongness the way eyes detected light. Places where violence had occurred felt different, heavier, colder even in heat. Objects touched by intense emotion carried residue she could feel through her skin. And people were worst of all, their hidden thoughts and suppressed urges leaking out in ways nobody else seemed to notice. Her parents had called it imagination. Doctors had called it anxiety disorder. The curandera her abuela had taken her to when she was 12 had called it don de ver, the gift of seeing. Some people are born with thinner walls between worlds, the old woman had said. The spirits find those gaps and speak through them. You can close the gaps with prayer and discipline, or you can learn to listen. Nicole had spent 15 years trying to close the gaps. She'd taken the ranger job specifically because Big Bend was remote, quiet, empty of the human emotional noise that overloaded her senses in cities. The desert was clean, simple, just rock and sky and silence. Until 4 days ago, when Sophia Carr disappeared and the silence started screaming. At half a mile into the canyon, Nicole found the first altar. It was built in an alcove, protected from direct sun, a flat stone surrounded by offerings that looked ancient and contemporary simultaneously. Clay bowls containing desiccated corn and beans, the kernels so old they'd turned to dust. Obsidian blades, their edges still sharp, arranged in a circle. Copal incense burned in a ceramic dish, the smoke rising straight up in the still air despite the lack of wind. And in the center, a photograph. Sophia Carr smiled from the Polaroid, her blonde hair pulled back in a ponytail, her expression caught in mid-laugh. The photo was recent, maybe days old. Someone had placed it carefully on the altar stone, weighed down with a river rock painted with symbols Nicole recognized from her training in Southwest archaeology. Nahuatl glyphs, the written language of the Aztecs. Nicole's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Turn back, Ranger Valdez. Some knowledge carries a price you cannot afford." She stared at the screen. Her personal cell number wasn't public record. She typed back, "Who is this?" No response. Nicole photographed the altar, then continued deeper into the canyon. The blood trail persisted, but now it was accompanied by other signs. Footprints in the sand, multiple people, some barefoot. Fabric fragments caught on lechuguilla plants, torn from clothing or ceremonial garments, and everywhere, that oppressive sense of presence. Like the canyon walls were closing in even though the physical dimensions remained constant. Her sensitivity was screaming now, not warning her away but pulling her forward, like following a thread through a maze. She'd learned to trust this instinct even when it terrified her. The places that felt most wrong were often where she was most needed. At mile 2, the canyon opened into a natural amphitheater, a circular space maybe 60 feet across, surrounded by sheer rock walls that rose 200 feet. The geology created perfect acoustics. Any sound made in the center would echo and amplify. And in the center stood 9 people wearing white cotton garments, facing east toward where the sun had risen, chanting in a language Nicole didn't speak, but her sensitivity recognized as old. Very old. She dropped into cover behind a boulder, heart hammering. The 9 figures, 6 men, 3 women, stood in a circle around something Nicole couldn't see from her angle. Their chanting had rhythm and structure, call and response, and even without understanding the words, Nicole felt the power building. The air itself seemed to thicken, heat shimmers forming patterns that looked almost deliberate. One figure stood apart from the circle, taller, wearing a headdress made from feathers and what looked like bone. When they raised their arms, the others fell silent. "Tonatiuh," the leader called out, voice amplified by the canyon's acoustics. "Devourer of hearts, we offer you sustenance in this, the 6th month of your sacred calendar. Accept our gift and grant us your favor." The figure lowered their arms, and the circle parted. In the center lay Sophia Carr. She was alive. Nicole could see her chest rising and falling, but bound hand and foot with rope made from agave fiber. Her clothing had been replaced with a white cotton shift, and her skin was painted with symbols in red ochre. Her eyes were open but unfocused, pupils dilated. Drugged, Nicole realized. They'd given her something to keep her compliant. Nicole's hand moved to her radio, then stopped. If she called this in, if she announced her presence, what would these people do? Kill Sophia immediately to avoid witnesses? Scatter into the desert where they clearly knew the terrain better than any ranger? Or worse, include Nicole in whatever ritual they were performing? Her phone buzzed again. Another text from the unknown number. "You feel it, don't you? The power gathering, the old gods waking. You have the gift, Nicole Valdez. You could join us instead of dying with her." Ice flooded Nicole's veins despite the desert heat. They knew she was here. They knew her name. They knew about her sensitivity. The leader spoke again. "Our ancestors understood what the invaders tried to destroy. The world requires balance. The sun must be fed or it weakens and dies. Tonatiuh, the 5th son, hungers. And we who remember the old ways must feed him, or he will devour himself and plunge the world into darkness. 23 offerings we have given over 21 years. Today we complete the cycle. Today we give the 24th, and Tonatiuh will grant us another generation of favor." 24. Sophia would be the 24th victim. Nicole's training screamed protocol, retreat, call for backup, approach with overwhelming force. But her sensitivity whispered something else, that Sophia had minutes, not hours. That the ritual was building toward a specific moment, probably aligned with solar position. That if Nicole left now, she'd return to find nothing but another disappeared person and a clean altar. She made a decision that would either save a life or end too. Nicole stood up from behind the boulder and walked into the amphitheater, hands visible and empty. "Stop," she said, her voice echoing off canyon walls. "I'm placing all of you under arrest for kidnapping and assault. Release Sophia Carr immediately." The 9 cultists turned as one. The leader tilted their head, and Nicole saw the face beneath the headdress. A woman, maybe 50, with the weathered skin of someone who'd spent decades in the desert sun. Her eyes were calm, almost amused. "Nicole Valdez," the woman said. "Born in El Paso, raised Catholic, lapsed by 16. Joined the Park Service at 23 after dropping out of a psychology PhD program because the voices in your head became too loud. You feel things others don't, see things others can't, and you think that makes you special." "I think that makes me aware you're about to commit murder," Nicole said, her hand moving slowly toward her service weapon, a Glock 22 she'd qualified with but never fired outside a range. "Last warning, release her." The leader laughed. "Or what? You'll shoot all 9 of us before we cut her throat? You're outnumbered, outmatched, and, most importantly, you're standing in a sacred space during a sacred moment. The power here isn't mine, Ranger Valdez. It belongs to forces that were old when these canyons were young. You feel it. I know you do. Your gift makes you sensitive to exactly the kind of energy we're channeling." She was right. Nicole could feel it. A building pressure like the moment before a thunderstorm breaks. Electricity in the air. Potential energy seeking release. And underneath that, something vast and hungry. Something that had been sleeping and was beginning to wake. "I don't care what you believe," Nicole said. "I care that you've kidnapped a graduate student and you're about to kill her. That's not religion, that's murder." "The Aztecs would disagree," the leader replied. "They understood that the universe requires sacrifice, that the gods who sustain reality must be sustained in turn. The Spanish tried to erase this knowledge, called it barbarism, forced our people to worship their bleeding god instead. But some of us remembered. Some of us preserved the old ways, and every generation when the signs align we gather. We choose, we offer, and we keep the world in balance." One of the cultists, a young man, maybe 30, stepped forward. "Elena, the sun is nearly at position. We need to complete the rite." Elena, the leader, had a name. Nicole filed it away along with every detail of the cultists' faces. If she survived this, every one of them would be identified and prosecuted. If she survived. "You have a choice," Elena said, addressing Nicole directly. "Walk away. We'll complete the ceremony and you'll find nothing here but sand and stone. We're very good at cleaning up. 23 times we've done this, and 23 times the authorities found nothing. Or," she smiled, "or you can try to stop us and we'll be forced to adjust our offering. 2 hearts feed Tonella better than 1. Nicole's hand was on her Glock now, but she didn't draw. Not yet. What happened to the others? The 23 people who disappeared? "They served their purpose," Elena said simply. "Their hearts fed the sun. Their blood sanctified the earth. Their sacrifice bought us another cycle of prosperity. Look around, Ranger Valdez. 21 years of perfect weather. No droughts, no wildfires, no major earthquakes. The land has been gentle because we've kept it fed." "That's insane," Nicole whispered. "Is it? Your science says correlation isn't causation, but what if it is? What if every year we don't perform the sacrifice, the world gets a little worse? The Aztecs believed the previous 4 suns had all died because humanity failed to maintain them. They believed we live in the 5th sun, Tonatiuh, and he will die too if he starves. We believe, that what you call murder is actually the highest form of love, sacrifice to preserve existence." The sun had climbed higher. Nicole could feel the temperature rising, the heat becoming aggressive, focused. And that vast hungry thing beneath reality was waking faster, drawn by the ritual, by the blood on ancient stones, by the promise of feeding. Sophia Carr moaned, her drugged stupor beginning to lift. Her eyes found Nicole, and in them Nicole saw terror, confusion, and a desperate plea. Nicole drew her weapon. "I'm going to count to 3, she said, aiming at Elena's center mass. "Then I start shooting. 1. The cultists didn't move. They simply watched, calm and certain. 2. Elena raised her hand. In it she held an obsidian blade, the edge so sharp it seemed to cut light itself. "You're sensitive, Nicole. You feel the power building. If you disrupt this ritual at its apex, that energy needs to go somewhere. You could kill us all, but you'll rupture the working, and the backlash will be catastrophic. Not just for you, for the entire region. Uncontrolled power is worse than no power at all. 3. Nicole fired. The bullet passed through Elena's hand, shattering bone and obliterating the obsidian blade. Elena screamed and dropped, and the other cultists broke formation, some running for cover, others rushing toward Nicole. She fired twice more, warning shots that kicked up sand at their feet, and the rush stopped. "On the ground," Nicole shouted. "All of you, face down, hands visible." Instead, they froze, and the air itself screamed. Nicole felt it like a physical blow, the ritual energy building toward controlled release, suddenly interrupted and seeking outlet. The temperature spiked 20 degrees in seconds. The rocks beneath her feet vibrated, and the sun, the actual sun overhead, seemed to pulse with malevolent awareness. Elena was laughing through her pain, cradling her shattered hand. "You fool, you've disrupted the offering. Tonatiuh was ready to accept our sacrifice, and now—" The ground opened, not metaphorically, literally. The amphitheater floor cracked in a spiderweb pattern radiating from where Sophia Carr lay bound, and from those cracks poured light. Not sunlight, but something older, hotter, hungry. The light carried sound, a bass rumble that Nicole felt in her bones more than heard with her ears. And underneath that, words. A language no human throat could speak, demanding, insisting, requiring. The cultists were chanting again, desperately now, trying to reassert control over forces they'd summoned but could no longer direct. And Sophia was changing. Her skin glowed from within, the red ochre symbols igniting with actual fire. Her back arched, mouth opening in a scream that had no sound, and the light from the cracks in the earth poured into her, filling her, transforming her into a vessel for something vast and terrible and starving. Nicole ran. She didn't remember making the decision. Her body moved on pure instinct, dropping the gun and sprinting toward Sophia while her mind screamed that this was suicide. The light burned where it touched skin, the heat intense enough to blister. But Nicole's sensitivity guided her, showing her the gaps between power flows, the safe paths through chaos. She reached Sophia, grabbed the rope bindings, and her hands blistered instantly on the agave fiber that was now superheated. Nicole screamed but didn't let go, yanking the bindings loose, freeing Sophia's hands and feet. The moment the ropes parted, the light receded. Not disappeared, receded, pulled back like a wave drawing away from shore before the tsunami hits. Sophia collapsed, unconscious but alive, the glow fading from her skin. And in the sudden silence, Nicole heard Elena's voice. "Now you've done it. Now you've refused the offering entirely. And Tonatiuh doesn't accept refusal." The sun overhead darkened, not an eclipse. Nicole looked up and saw the sun itself changing, its corona expanding, reaching, becoming something with intention behind it. The temperature dropped precipitously, from 110 degrees to below freezing in seconds. Frost formed on the superheated rocks, creating steam that rose in great clouds, and from those clouds descended something that wore the sun's face like a mask. It had no body in any conventional sense, just geometry made from light and heat and hunger, angles that shouldn't exist in three-dimensional space, a presence so vast that the canyon was barely large enough to contain a fraction of its awareness. Where it focused attention, reality warped, stone melted, air ignited, and underneath everything, that hunger, bottomless and absolute, the need to consume that defined its existence. The cultists were prostrate now, foreheads pressed to burning sand, chanting prayers that sounded more like begging. Elena crawled toward Nicole, her shattered hand leaving blood trails. "You have to complete the offering," she gasped. "You have to give it a heart. Yours, mine, hers, it doesn't care. But it won't leave without feeding. We called it. We promised it sustenance. And promises made to gods carry weight you cannot imagine." Nicole looked at the thing descending from the sun, at Sophia unconscious at her feet, at the 9 cultists who'd kidnapped and nearly murdered a graduate student in the name of keeping cosmic balance, and she made a choice that felt both insane and inevitable. You want a heart? Nicole shouted up at the geometry thing that wore the sun's face. Fine, take theirs. She pointed at Elena, at the cultists, at the people who'd fed this thing for 21 years with stolen lives. The thing that was Tonatiuh, that was the fifth son. That was hunger given divine form, shifted its attention. And Nicole felt its amusement. Vast, cold, terrible amusement at the audacity of a human trying to redirect its appetite. But then it considered. And Nicole felt its consideration like being weighed on scales calibrated for souls. The cultists had offered it regular sustenance for decades. Their faith had fed it as much as blood. Their rituals had given it anchor points in reality, connections that allowed it to manifest, to reach into the physical world and taste. They had value beyond mere flesh. If they were consumed, those connections would sever, but the consumption itself would be immensely satisfying. The equation balanced. The thing reached down with appendages made from concentrated solar radiation and touched the 9 cultists simultaneously. They ignited, not burned. Ignited, their bodies becoming fuel for transformation that converted matter directly into energy. Their screams lasted exactly 3 seconds, and then they were light, pure light, being drawn up and up into the geometry thing's center where reality folded in on itself. Nicole turned away, grabbed Sophia, and ran. Behind her, the amphitheater collapsed as the thing finished feeding and released its grip on physical manifestation. The rocks that had stood for millions of years simply ceased. Their atomic bonds dissolved. Everything reduced to component particles and scattered on winds that shrieked with voices that might have been cultists or might have been something older. Nicole ran until her lungs burned, until her legs gave out, until she collapsed in the shadow of a boulder 2 miles from where she'd left 9 people to be devoured by their own god. She lay there gasping while Sophia stirred beside her, coming back to consciousness with the slow confusion of someone waking from drugged sleep. What? Sophia's voice was raw. What happened? Nicole looked back toward Boquillas Canyon. The amphitheater was gone, just a smooth depression in the landscape now, like it had been eroded by wind rather than destroyed by something from beyond normal physics. You're safe, Nicole said, which wasn't an answer but was the only thing she could think to say. The helicopter found them 3 hours later, guided by Nicole's emergency beacon. The story she told, that she'd found Sophia held captive by a cult, that there'd been a confrontation, that a flash flood had swept the cultists away, was thin and full of holes. But Sophia, traumatized and drugged, confirmed the basic details. And when the search teams went looking, they found exactly what Nicole knew they'd find. Nothing. No bodies. No evidence. Just sand and stone and the endless, empty desert. The official report listed 9 suspects as missing, presumed dead. Sophia Carr was returned to her family in Austin. Nicole Valdez was commended for her bravery and given 3 weeks of mandatory administrative leave to process the trauma. She spent those weeks in her apartment in Terlingua, not sleeping, not eating much, just staring out at Big Bend's mountains and trying to understand what she'd done. She'd fed 9 people to a god, to save one. The math seemed simple until she tried to sleep, and then she saw their faces, heard their screams, remembered the exact moment they'd stopped being human and become light. The curandera her abuela had taken her to called on the 2nd week. You carry death now, the old woman said without preamble. Not guilt, that's just human emotion. You carry the actual weight of disrupted lives. It will anchor you to this place until you decide what to do with it. What am I supposed to do with it? Nicole asked. That's the question, isn't it? You can let it crush you, or you can use it. There are other places where the walls are thin, other things that slip through, other hungers that need feeding. Some people dedicate their lives to sealing those gaps. Others learn to navigate them. But nobody with your gift gets to pretend they don't exist anymore. Not after what you've seen. The old woman hung up. Nicole returned to work after 3 weeks, filed her reports, led her tours, explained the petroglyphs to tourists, carefully not mentioning that she'd watched them bleed. But at night, she researched, cross-referenced disappearances across national parks, found patterns others missed, Dates that aligned with festivals from dead religions, places where the missing clustered like iron filings around magnets, and she started to see the network. Not just Big Bend, everywhere. Thin places where reality wore through, where old things persisted, where people like Elena's cult still performed ceremonies to gods who should have died but stubbornly refused. 6 months after Sophia Carr was rescued, Nicole Valdez requested transfer to Yosemite. The supervisor approved it with relief. Everyone knew the Boquillas Canyon incident had changed her, made her harder, more distant. A change of scenery would help. What the supervisor didn't know was that Yosemite had its own pattern. 16 disappearances over 12 years, all aligned with phases of the moon. All in areas where indigenous peoples had once performed ceremonies to entities the missionaries had tried to erase, but only succeeded in driving underground. Nicole packed her apartment methodically. She loaded her truck with camping gear, research materials, and one item she'd taken from the amphitheater before the helicopter arrived. A small obsidian blade, broken and incomplete, that still hummed with residual power when she touched it. She'd learned something in Boquillas Canyon. Something about the price of keeping reality stable. About the hunger that existed in the gaps between worlds. About the math of sacrifice and survival. She'd learned that sometimes the monsters were human, sometimes they were divine, and sometimes, often, they were both simultaneously, feeding on each other in cycles that had persisted since before recorded history. Nicole Valdez had spent 15 years trying to close the gaps in her perception. Now she was going to learn to use them, to find the places where the walls were thin, to understand what slipped through, and if necessary, if the math demanded it, to decide who fed whom, because she touched the divine now, had felt its hunger, had redirected its appetite and survived. That changed a person, made them responsible in ways that civilian life couldn't accommodate. The desert watched her leave, and in the watching, Nicole felt approval from something vast and hot and patient, something that had been fed after decades of hunger and was content to wait for the next offering, whenever it might come. The petroglyphs in Boquillas Canyon didn't bleed anymore, but sometimes when the light hit them just right, they glowed with residual warmth that no geological process could explain. And sometimes, tourists reported seeing a woman in ranger uniform standing in the amphitheater that wasn't supposed to exist anymore, looking up at the sun with an expression that mixed fear and understanding and terrible, terrible knowledge. But those reports were dismissed as heat mirages, desert hallucinations, the kind of thing that happened to people who stayed out in Big Bend too long without enough water. Nicole knew better, knew that some knowledge carried a price, knew that she'd paid in 9 lives that weren't hers to spend, knew that the debt would follow her wherever the thin places led, and she drove toward Yosemite, toward the next pattern, toward whatever hungry thing was waiting there with her eyes open and her sensitivity screaming and the weight of divine hunger sitting in her chest like a second heart. The old gods were real, the old ways persisted, and someone had to stand in the gaps, making impossible choices about who lived and who fed and who carried the weight of keeping reality from collapsing into the hungry dark beneath. Nicole Valdez had become that someone, not by choice, not by design, but by surviving a moment when the sun itself looked down and demanded sacrifice. She couldn't go back to ignorance, could only go forward into knowledge, however terrible. The desert watched her leave and whispered approval in a language made from heat and stone and hunger that would never, ever be satisfied. Hope you felt genuine terror. If you appreciate authentic horror rooted in real folklore, consider following for more stories. Which moment scared you most? Share your theory about what happened. Daddy, when are you coming home? David Ramirez pressed his satellite phone harder against his ear, as if proximity could somehow bridge the 300 miles between the Great Smoky Mountains and his daughter's bedroom in Knoxville. Thursday, mija, just like I told you. 3 more days. But you said that last week. Sophia's voice carried that particular tremor that meant she was trying not to cry. She was 8 years old and had gotten very good at trying not to cry in the 2 years since her mother had died. You said 3 days and then you didn't come home. I know, baby. I'm sorry. There's a missing hiker, and I have to find him. David checked his watch. 6:47 p.m., October 23rd, 2015. He'd been in the backcountry for 11 days now, the longest single deployment since taking this job with the National Park Service. But I promise, Thursday morning I'll be home. We'll make pancakes, okay? The Mickey Mouse ones you like. With chocolate chips? With so many chocolate chips your abuela will yell at me. He smiled despite the exhaustion that made his bones ache. Now go brush your teeth. Is abuela there? She's making dinner. Daddy, are you safe? The question hit him harder than it should have. Sophia asked it every time he called now, had asked it constantly in the months after the funeral. Are you safe? Will you come back? You won't leave me like Mama did? I'm safe, mija. I promise. I love you. Love you too. Thursday? Thursday. David ended the call and stood in the deepening twilight of the Appalachian forest, feeling the weight of promises he might not be able to keep. Elena would have known what to say, would have found the right words to make Sophia feel secure without lying about the inherent risks of his job. But Elena was gone, lung cancer at 34, and David was doing his best with parenting skills that felt inadequate even on good days. And this was not a good day. Connor Burke had been missing for 9 days. 26 years old, experienced backpacker, had been hiking the Appalachian Trail section that cut through the Smokies. His last confirmed position was at the Peck's Corner Shelter, mile marker 197.6, where other hikers had seen him on October 14th. Then nothing. No trail register entries, no resupply pickups, no communication despite carrying a functioning spot GPS beacon that should have transmitted his position every 12 hours. Until 3 hours ago, when David's radio had crackled to life with a transmission that had made every hair on his body stand upright. He pulled out his Motorola and replayed the recording for the 5th time, listening to Connor Burke's voice rasp through waves of static. Not dead. They're not dead. Why won't they stay dead? Something wrong with the ground here, something in the soil. They keep coming back, keep getting up. I killed him 3 times and he... Symbols on the trees, old symbols, circle of stones. Thursday night, they said. Thursday night when the moon... Oh God, he's moving again, he's... The transmission had cut off with sounds that David's mind refused to fully process. Screaming. Something that might have been laughter. Then silence. Park Dispatch had triangulated the signal's origin to a region northeast of Peck's Corner, an area off-trail and unmapped in the official Park Service databases. Old-growth forest, steep terrain, no maintained paths, the kind of place hikers were explicitly warned to avoid. David had volunteered to go in alone. Standard protocol called for a team, but the Park Service was understaffed in October, and every available ranger was scattered across the Smokies, dealing with the usual late-season emergencies. Someone had to respond immediately to what might be a hiker in severe psychological distress, and David had the most backcountry experience. More importantly, he needed the overtime. Sophia's medical bills from Elena's final months had demolished their savings. His mother helped with childcare but lived on a fixed income. Every extra shift, every hazard pay bonus, every dollar mattered because it meant keeping the house, keeping Sophia's life stable, keeping his promise that even though Mama was gone, everything else would stay the same. So he'd lied to his daughter about being safe, shouldered his pack, and headed into forest that felt wrong from the first step. The wrongness had intensified over the past 3 hours of hiking. David couldn't articulate what bothered him. Nothing obvious like unusual animal behavior or weather anomalies. Just a quality to the silence that felt expectant. A heaviness to the air that had nothing to do with humidity. The kind of wrongness that made his hindbrain whisper warnings his rational mind tried to dismiss. He'd felt something similar 2 years ago, standing in the oncologist's office while the doctor explained that stage 4 meant months, not years. That they should prepare, that sometimes medicine couldn't fix things. That same sense that reality had shifted slightly off its axis, that the rules he'd understood about how the world worked had suddenly changed. David shook off the memory and consulted his Garmin GPS map 64. Connor's transmission had originated from coordinates approximately 2 miles northeast. The terrain map showed elevation changes that would make the hike challenging in full daylight, potentially dangerous in gathering darkness. But David had a Petzl headlamp, 30 years of hiking experience, and a missing man who might still be alive. He also had a daughter who needed him to come home on Thursday. David started hiking. The forest changed as he moved deeper into unmarked territory. The trees grew more densely packed, their trunks twisted in ways that suggested difficult growing conditions, poor soil perhaps, or some geological feature that stressed the root systems. The undergrowth thinned to almost nothing, leaving bare ground covered in a layer of leaf litter that looked oddly uniform, as if it had been deliberately arranged. He found the first symbol at 7:23 p.m., carved into an oak tree with cuts so deep they'd scarred the heartwood. David stopped and examined it with his headlamp, photographing it with his department-issued Nikon. Not English letters. Not any alphabet he recognized. Geometric shapes arranged in patterns that suggested intentionality. Circles within triangles, lines radiating from central points, curves that almost formed recognizable images, but stopped just short of clarity. The cuts were old, decades old, judging by the scarring and regrowth. But someone had recently refreshed them, deepening the grooves, scraping away bark to make the symbols visible again. David found 6 more marked trees over the next quarter mile, each bearing similar symbols, each arranged as if marking a path or a boundary. The soil changed. He noticed it first as a difference in how his boots contacted the ground, softer than it should be, almost spongy despite the dry October weather. Then he saw the color, dark, almost black, with a richness that suggested heavy organic content. Fertile soil, the kind of soil that should produce lush vegetation. But nothing grew here except the twisted trees. No undergrowth, no ferns, no moss. Just that uniform carpet of dead leaves over soil that felt wrong beneath his feet. David's radio crackled. He grabbed it, hoping for dispatch, hoping for backup, hoping for literally anything that would make him feel less alone in this forest. Static emerged, textured and dense. But underneath it, just barely audible, he heard something else. A voice. Not Connor Burke's. Someone else. Speaking in a language David's brain struggled to process. Harsh consonants, vowels that seemed to require throat shapes humans didn't have. The language stopped and started again. And this time David recognized a single word repeated 3 times. Strigoi. 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 He'd heard that word before. Elena had been second-generation Romanian-American, had grown up with her grandmother's stories about the old country, about creatures that walked after death, about the undead that retained their intelligence and their grudges. Vampiric, but not Dracula. Something older, more rooted in folk tradition than Gothic romance. Strigoi, the risen dead, the ones who came back. David's finger moved to the radio transmit button, but he stopped himself. What would he say? That he'd heard a word from Romanian folklore whispered through static in the Great Smoky Mountains? Dispatch would think he was experiencing the same psychological break that had apparently affected Connor Burke. He kept hiking, following the GPS coordinates, following the marked trees, following the path through soil that grew darker and softer with every step. He found Connor Burke's campsite at 8:14 p.m. The tent stood intact. MSR Hubba Hubba 2-person model, staked properly with guy lines taut. Connor's backpack leaned against a nearby tree, bear canister closed and secured. His camp stove sat near a ring of stones that formed a fire pit. Everything looked organized, maintained, normal. Except for the blood. It covered the tent's exterior in arterial spray patterns that David's law enforcement training recognized immediately. Not a small amount. Not an injury someone walked away from, the kind of blood loss that meant death within minutes unless major trauma care intervened immediately. But Connor Burke had made that radio transmission 3 hours ago. Had been alive, coherent, terrified. 9 days after disappearing. With this much blood coating his tent. David approached slowly, noting details with the clinical detachment that training provided. Blood on tent. Fresh, still tacky to the touch. blood spatter suggesting violent struggle. But no body. No drag marks. No trail leading away from the campsite. He found Connor's spot GPS beacon inside the tent, its battery dead. Found his satellite phone, crushed as if someone had deliberately stomped it into pieces. Found his journal. Final entry dated October 14th, the day he'd last been seen at Peck's Corner shelter. The journal's last page contained a single sentence repeated over and over in handwriting that deteriorated from neat to frantic. They don't stay dead. They don't stay dead. They don't stay dead. David's professional assessment. Connor Burke had experienced severe psychological crisis, possibly drug-induced, possibly organic mental health emergency. The blood might be animal, deer, bear, anything Connor had killed in a state of confusion and interpreted as something supernatural. The radio transmission was real but not reliable as evidence of anything except that Connor was alive and needed immediate psychiatric evaluation. That's what David's training told him. His instincts told him something else entirely. His instincts, honed by 30 years in wilderness and 2 years of watching someone he loved die slowly, despite every medical intervention, told him that Connor Burke had encountered something that broke the rules David thought governed reality. The symbols on the trees, the wrong soil, the radio voice speaking Romanian, the blood that was fresh despite being 9 days old. Thursday night, Connor had said in his transmission. They said Thursday night when the moon... David checked his watch again. October 23rd. If Connor had disappeared on October 14th, then Thursday night would be October 24th, tomorrow night. A sound behind him made David spin around, hand moving to the canister of bear spray on his belt. Nothing there. Just forest. Just darkness beyond his headlamp's cone of light. Just the feeling of being watched by something patient and intelligent. He swept his light across the tree line and froze. A figure stood at the edge of his lamp's range. Human-shaped, wearing what looked like hiking gear, motionless. "Connor Burke?" David called. "I'm a park ranger. I'm here to help you." The figure didn't respond, didn't move, just stood there with a stillness that felt unnatural, that felt like the stillness of things that didn't need to breathe. David took a step forward. "Connor, can you hear me? Are you injured?" The figure moved, not walking but somehow shifting position, covering 10 feet in what should have been a single step but looked more like a jump cut in a film, a transition without the intervening motion. It was close enough now that David could see details. Male, late 20s, wearing a flannel shirt and hiking pants. Face pale, almost gray. Eyes reflecting his headlamp with a quality that was wrong, that was too bright. That was the shine of a nocturnal predator caught in spotlight, and David could smell it. Decay. Not the fresh decay of recent death, but something older, something preserved. The smell of a funeral home before the embalming chemicals masked the truth. "Connor?" The name came out as a whisper. The thing wearing Connor Burke's face smiled, revealing teeth that were too sharp, that had been filed or had grown into points. When it spoke, the voice was Connor's, but filtered through damage, through death, through something that remembered how to form words but had forgotten the breathing that should accompany them. Not Connor anymore. Not quite. We're something else now. Something that doesn't stay dead. It took another step. Normal movement this time, feet contacting ground. And David saw the wounds. Connor's throat had been torn open, the tissue ragged and dark. His chest showed trauma consistent with what had created the blood spatter on the tent. Fatal injuries. Absolutely fatal. Except Connor was standing, walking, talking. David's mind fragmented between training and terror. His training said, injured hiker, possible infection causing altered mental state, maintain calm and radio for medical evacuation. His terror said, run, run now, run before it gets closer, run before you understand what you're seeing. We tried to fight it, Connor continued in that breathless voice. When he first came back, old man, died on the trail 3 weeks ago. Heart attack, we thought. Left him for the rangers to find. But he came back Thursday night, rose from the ground where we'd covered him with stones, tried to make us like him, tried to make us strigoi. The Romanian word again. The undead. the Risen. "We killed him," Connor said. 3 times. Shot him, stabbed him, burned him. He kept getting up, kept coming back, until we learned the rules, until he taught us, and then... Connor's smile widened impossibly. Then we understood. We became what he was, what this place makes, what Thursday nights create when the moon is right and the soil is prepared. David's hand found his radio. He needed to call this in, needed backup, needed someone else to witness this because his mind was rejecting the data his senses provided. Connor moved faster than anything dead should move, covering the distance between them in a blur of motion that David's eyes couldn't properly track. Cold hands, impossibly cold, corpse cold, gripped his shoulders with strength that made his bones creak. "You won't call anyone," Connor whispered, his breath carrying that funeral home smell. "Because you understand now. You understand what I understood. What we all understand. The dead don't rest here, not in soil prepared by old rituals. Not when the symbols are carved and the stones are set and the moon is waxing toward Thursday." David tried to pull away, but Connor's grip was absolute. Those cold fingers, those dead fingers, held him with the strength of something that didn't tire, that didn't need muscle to function, that operated on rules that had nothing to do with biology. "How many others?" David managed to ask, his voice steady despite the terror flooding his system. 6 before me. Hikers who strayed off trail, who found this place, who died here and came back." Connor leaned closer. "And one more coming, one more tomorrow night when the moon reaches full and the soil is hungry for another body to transform. I'm not dying here." David's hand moved to the bear spray, pulled it free, aimed it at Connor's face, and pressed the trigger. The capsaicin spray hit Connor Burke's dead eyes and had absolutely no effect. He didn't blink, didn't flinch, didn't react at all because pain required living nerve endings and Connor's nerves had been dead for days. "That won't work," Connor said almost gently. "None of the living world's weapons work against us. We're beyond pain now, beyond fear, beyond everything except the hunger." He released David and stepped back, gesturing at the forest around them. "This place is old, older than the Park Service, older than America. There were people here before, people who understood death differently, who knew how to prepare ground for the Strigoi. Romanian immigrants in the 1800s maybe, or something older. Native tribes with their own names for the undead. The symbols mark the boundary. The soil holds the transformation. And Thursday nights when the moon is full or nearly full, that's when we rise." David's mind raced through options. Fight was useless. Connor had demonstrated supernatural strength and imperviousness to pain. Flight might work if he could reach normal ground, get beyond the boundary marked by those symbols. But his daughter's voice echoed in his mind. "Are you safe? Will you come back?" He'd promised Thursday. He'd promised pancakes with chocolate chips. He'd promised he wouldn't leave her the way Elena had. "Why are you telling me this?" David asked, buying time, analyzing the situation the way his ranger training had taught him. "If you're going to kill me, why explain?" "Because you're not dying tonight," Connor said. "Tonight is Friday. The transformation only works on Thursday nights. Tonight we're just talking, just waiting, just preparing you to understand what's coming." He gestured toward the tent. "I left the beacon on deliberately, made the radio call. We wanted someone to come. We wanted a ranger because rangers are trained to keep looking, to keep searching, to never leave people behind. We knew you'd come alone. We knew you'd stay until you found me." David's blood went cold as understanding crystallized. "Tomorrow night. Thursday, October 24th, when the moon reaches full, when the soil is ready for another body, when you'll die and rise and become like us. Strigoi, the undead who remember being alive, who remember their families, their children, their promises they can never keep." Connor's expression flickered with something that might have been residual humanity, might have been genuine sorrow. "I had a sister, in Portland, was supposed to visit her next month. I still remember her phone number, still want to call her, but that's the curse of the Strigoi. We remember love but can't act on it. We remember life but can't return to it. We exist in between, forever. David took a step backward, then another, moving slowly toward what he hoped was the boundary marked by the symbols. I have a daughter, 8 years old. I promised her I'd come home Thursday. You will, Connor said softly. Just not as what you are now. You'll come home as something else, something that looks like you but isn't. Something that remembers loving her but can't feel it anymore. That's the worst part. The remembering without feeling. The knowing what you've lost, but being unable to care. David ran. Training said to maintain awareness, to move carefully through unknown terrain to avoid panic. But David's training had been designed for a world where the dead stayed dead, where reality followed consistent rules, where promises to 8-year-old daughters could be kept through simple competence and caution. This wasn't that world anymore. He crashed through undergrowth, following his GPS back toward the trailhead, toward normal forest, toward soil that didn't transform corpses into undead. Behind him he heard laughter. Connor's laugh, wrong and breathless, joined by other voices. 6 others, Connor had said. 6 hikers who'd died and risen. 7 strigoi in these woods. And tomorrow night, if Connor was right, there would be 8. David's headlamp beam caught symbols on trees, and he realized he was running parallel to the boundary, not across it. The marked trees formed a perimeter, and he'd somehow gotten turned around in his panic. He consulted his GPS, but the coordinates showed him exactly where the symbol suggested he was. Inside the ritual ground, inside the prepared soil, inside the place where Thursday nights transformed death into something worse. Movement in his peripheral vision. Figures between trees moving with that too-fast motion, that jump-cut displacement. 7 of them now, Connor's promise made visible. They weren't chasing him aggressively. They were hurting him, keeping him inside the boundary, making sure he stayed until Thursday night when the moon and the soil and whatever old magic governed this place could work their transformation. David found a large oak and put his back against it, pulling out his radio. He'd call dispatch. He'd report everything. He'd sound insane, but at least there would be a record, a warning, something that might save the next hiker who strayed into this cursed ground. The radio produced only that textured static, and underneath it, that voice speaking Romanian. But this time David heard more than just strigoi. This time he heard a longer phrase, repeated in a cadence that sounded like prayer or incantation. Pământul este pregătit, luna crește, joi noaptea morții se ridică. The soil is prepared. The moon grows. Thursday night, the dead rise. David didn't speak Romanian beyond the few words Elena had taught him, but somehow he understood this phrase perfectly, as if the language itself was designed to be understood by the doomed, by the about to die, by anyone trapped inside the boundary when Thursday night arrived. His satellite phone. He still had the satellite phone. He could call his mother, could tell her to take Sophia somewhere safe, could warn her that if he didn't come home she should what? Tell his 8-year-old daughter that monsters were real? That her father had become one of the undead? That some promises couldn't be kept no matter how hard you tried? David pulled out the phone and found Sophia's school photo tucked into the case. Her smile, her missing front tooth, her eyes that were Elena's eyes, his reason for taking overtime shifts, his reason for saying yes to dangerous assignments, his reason for everything that mattered. "I'm sorry, Mija," he whispered to the photo. "I'm so sorry." A hand settled on his shoulder, gentle this time, almost compassionate. David turned and found himself facing a different strigoi, not Connor Burke, someone older, wearing clothes from a different era. The first one, perhaps, the man whose heart attack had started this cycle of death and resurrection. "You don't have to be sorry," the old strigoi said in accented English. "You can survive, there's a way out, but it requires sacrifice." David's hope flared despite his better judgment. What way? The ritual requires a death on Thursday night, but it doesn't specify whose death. The old strigoi gestured at the forest around them. "We're already dead, already transformed. But the ground is hungry. It needs fresh death to complete the cycle. It needs someone who hasn't died yet." Understanding hit David like a physical blow. "You want me to kill someone else?" Bring another hiker here. Sacrifice them so I can leave. Not just any hiker, the Strigoi said. It has to be someone who comes willingly. Someone who crosses the boundary by choice. Someone who... He paused, his dead eyes fixing on the satellite phone in David's hand. Someone who loves you enough to come save you. David's blood turned to ice. No. Your mother, perhaps. She's elderly but healthy. She could make the hike if she was motivated. If you called her, told her you were injured, told her you needed help immediately and couldn't wait for Park Service rescue. Absolutely not. Or, the Strigoi continued, his voice taking on a cruel edge. You could wait until Thursday night. Die and rise. Go home as something that looks like you but isn't. Your daughter won't know at first. She'll hug you. She'll make you promise to never leave again. And you'll promise because Strigoi remember how to lie. But eventually she'll realize. Eventually she'll see that her father died in these woods, and something else came home wearing his face. How long do you think before she understands? A week? A month? How much damage will that do to an 8-year-old who's already lost her mother? David's finger moved to the satellite phone's power button. He could call his mother, could save himself, could condemn her to the death that awaited him, or he could refuse, could die tomorrow night, could rise as Strigoi and go home to Sophia as a monster wearing her father's face, or... The third option crystallized in his mind with terrible clarity. He could die tonight, right now. On Friday, when the moon wasn't full, when the transformation ritual wouldn't work, he could take himself off the board before Thursday arrived, could deny the ritual its required death, could ensure that whatever happened to his body, his daughter wouldn't have to face a father who'd become something inhuman. David looked at Sophia's photo one more time. I love you, Mija. I'm sorry I won't be home for pancakes. He pulled out his bench-made bushcrafter knife, the one Elena had given him for their 10th anniversary, the one he carried on every assignment. The blade was sharp. He knew anatomy. He knew how to make it quick. The Strigoi grabbed his wrist with superhuman speed. Wait, you don't understand what you're doing. I understand perfectly. David tried to pull free, but the grip was absolute. I die tonight, on Friday, and your ritual fails. No transformation, no 8th Strigoi. Just a dead ranger who saved his daughter from something worse than losing another parent. The ritual doesn't fail, the old Strigoi hissed. It adapts. If you die tonight by your own hand, you still rise, but you rise wrong. Improperly transformed. The ones who kill themselves before Thursday don't become Strigoi. They become something worse. Something without even the memory of humanity. Something that hunts and feeds and destroys without purpose or restraint. Connor Burke appeared beside the older Strigoi, his face grim. He's telling the truth. We've seen it happen. A hiker last year tried the same thing you're planning. She rose anyway. We had to destroy her 3 times before she finally stayed down. What she became... He shuddered, a gesture that looked wrong on a corpse. You don't want to become that. Not if you care at all about your daughter's safety. David's mind raced through the logic, looking for exits, finding none. Die Thursday and rise as Strigoi. Die tonight and rise as something worse. Sacrifice someone else to escape. Or wait here until Thursday, hoping for rescue that would probably arrive too late. 4 options. All of them terrible. His satellite phone vibrated. Incoming call. At 8:47 p.m. on a Friday night, only one person would be calling. David answered. Hi, baby. Daddy, you said you'd call before bedtime. Sophia's voice was small, worried. You didn't call. I'm sorry, Mija. I got busy, but I'm calling now. Are you safe? The question that haunted him. The question he'd promised to answer honestly. The question that now had only terrible answers. David's voice broke. I'm in some trouble, Sophia. Bad trouble, but I need you to know that I love you more than anything in the world. And whatever happens, that never changes. Do you understand? Silence on the line. Then, in a voice made older by loss, You're not coming home Thursday, are you? David closed his eyes against tears that blurred the forest around him. I don't think so, baby. I'm so sorry. I wanted to. I promised. But sometimes things happen that even promises can't fix. Like with Mama. Yeah, like with Mama. More silence. David could hear his mother's voice in the background asking what was wrong. Then Sophia again. Daddy, are you going to die? The Strigoi watched him with expressions that might have been curiosity or might have been pity. 7 undead hikers waiting to see what choice a desperate father would make. 7 monsters who remembered being human enough to understand the weight of this moment. David looked at Connor Burke, at the old Strigoi, at the others emerging from the shadows. Then he looked at the symbols on the trees, at the dark soil beneath his feet, at the GPS coordinates that placed him inside the boundary of something older and darker than Park Service jurisdictions. Yes, Mija, he said finally. I think I am. Sophia's sob nearly broke him, but he continued, needing her to understand, needing her to remember him as he was and not as what he might become. But I need you to know something important. When rangers come to tell Abuela what happened, they might say I'm missing. They might even say I came back. But Sophia, listen to me very carefully. If someone comes to the house who looks like me, who sounds like me, but something feels wrong, you don't let him in. You don't trust him. Because that won't be me. That will be something else wearing my face. Do you understand? I don't want you to die. Her voice was barely a whisper. I know, baby. I don't want to die either, but I need you to be strong. Like you've been strong since Mama died. Can you do that for me? I'll try. That's my girl. I love you, Sophia. More than the moon and all the stars. Remember that. Always remember that. I love you too, Daddy. More than pancakes with chocolate chips. David's laugh turned into a choked sob. That's a lot of love, Mija. That's... His voice failed completely. Goodbye, baby. Be good for Abuela. He ended the call before she could hear him completely fall apart. The Strigoi stood in a loose circle around him now. 7 dead faces showing varying degrees of sympathy or hunger or nothing at all. David looked at each of them and saw his future. Eternal existence in this cursed forest, trapped by boundaries marked with ancient symbols, remembering humanity but unable to feel it, knowing love but incapable of expressing it. Connor Burke stepped forward. There's still time. Thursday isn't until tomorrow night. The Park Service will keep searching. Helicopters, search dogs, maybe they'll find you before then. And if they do? David asked. What happens when they cross the boundary, when they come into the ritual ground? The old Strigoi smiled without humor. Then we have choices. Multiple deaths on Thursday night. Multiple transformations. The ritual isn't picky about numbers. So rescue meant condemning other rangers to his fate, meant creating more Strigoi, meant spreading this curse beyond the boundary. David made his decision. He stood up, pocketed the satellite phone with Sophia's photo still in the case, and faced the 7 undead hikers. I'm not running. I'm not calling for rescue. I'm not sacrificing anyone else. Thursday night, when it happens, I want you to do something for me. Connor tilted his head. What? After I rise, after I become like you, destroy me. Completely. However you destroyed that hiker last year. Make sure I don't last. Make sure I don't go home to my daughter as something that looks like her father but isn't. The Strigoi exchanged glances, silent communication passing between them. Finally, the old one spoke. That's mercy. We don't usually grant mercy. I'm not asking for mercy. I'm asking for the only thing that might save my daughter from a lifetime of nightmares. If I die here, I want to stay dead. Actually dead. Not undead. Not anything. Just gone. Connor Burke's dead face showed something that might have been respect. Most people beg to live, to be spared. You're the first one who's asked us to truly kill them. Most people don't have 8-year-old daughters waiting for pancakes. The Strigoi were silent for a long moment. Then, One by one, they nodded. Thursday night, the old Strigoi said, "You'll die. You'll rise. And before you fully transform, before you gain our strength and speed, we'll end you permanently. We'll make sure David Ramirez stays dead and doesn't go home to haunt his daughter as something that wears his face." David felt tears streaming down his cheeks, but his voice was steady. "Thank you." He spent Friday night sitting against the oak tree, watching the Strigoi move through the forest with their too-fast motion, their impossible grace. They didn't threaten him, didn't touch him, just kept him inside the boundary, waiting for Thursday. Saturday, he tried his radio one more time, got only static and that voice speaking Romanian. Pământul este pregătit, luna crește. Sunday, he called his mother on the satellite phone and lied about being delayed by weather, told her to kiss Sophia for him, told her he loved them both. Monday, he wrote a letter to Sophia in his field notebook, explaining as best he could, telling her she'd been the best thing in his life, asking her to forgive him for breaking his promise. Tuesday, he organized his gear methodically, making sure his ranger badge and ID were easily accessible, making sure whoever found his body would know who he'd been. Wednesday, the moon was nearly full. David could feel something changing in the soil beneath him, in the air around him, in the symbols on the trees that seemed to glow faintly in darkness. The ritual ground was preparing. The transformation was coming. Thursday morning, he called Sophia one last time. "Daddy, when are you coming home?" "Soon, Micha," he lied. "Very soon." "Promise?" David looked at the 7 Strigoi standing at the edge of the clearing, waiting. Looked at the dark soil that would receive his body. Looked at the moon rising through the trees, full and patient. "I promise, baby, I'll see you again." It wasn't exactly a lie. Whatever rose from this ground tonight would look like him, would wear his face, would speak with his voice. For a few minutes before the Strigoi destroyed it, it would technically be him. But it wouldn't be the father Sophia deserved. It wouldn't be the man who'd promised pancakes with chocolate chips. That man died Thursday night, October 24th, 2015, in a ritual ground deep in the Great Smoky Mountains, surrounded by the undead and the cursed. And as promised, the Strigoi made sure he stayed dead. 3 weeks later, park rangers found David Ramirez's body in the forest, northeast of Peck's Corner Shelter. The official report noted extensive wildlife scavenging that made determining cause of death difficult. His personal effects were returned to his family. His daughter received his ranger badge in a small ceremony. Sophia Ramirez, 8 years old and already far too familiar with loss, accepted the badge and asked only one question. "Are you sure it was him? Are you completely sure?" The ranger presenting the badge looked confused. "I'm sorry?" "My daddy told me," Sophia said carefully, "that if someone came who looked like him but felt wrong, I shouldn't trust them. He told me to be sure. So I'm asking, are you sure the person you found was really my daddy?" The rangers exchanged uncomfortable glances. The body's condition had made visual identification challenging. They'd relied on dental records, on personal effects, on probability and circumstance. Were they sure? Completely sure? "Yes," the senior ranger said, because what else could he say to a grieving child? "We're sure." Sophia nodded and held the badge tight. "Okay." Then he kept his promise. He came home. Not the way he'd wanted, not the way she'd hoped, but he'd kept his promise about being sure, about warning her, about protecting her even after death. And late at night, when Sophia woke from nightmares about shadows moving wrong and voices that sounded like her father but weren't quite right, she remembered his last words. "That won't be me. That will be something else wearing my face." She checked the locks on the doors and windows. She made sure the symbols her abuela had drawn in salt were still intact, and she waited, brave and watchful, for the day when something might come to the door wearing her father's face and asking to be let in. But David Ramirez had kept his promise. The Strigoi had destroyed him completely, and whatever darkness lived in the Great Smoky Mountains, whatever ritual ground prepared soil for the undead, it did not claim the soul of a father who'd loved his daughter more than immortality, more than survival, more than anything except keeping her safe from the truth of what he might have become. In the end, that was enough. Hope you felt genuine terror. If you appreciate authentic horror rooted in real folklore, consider following for more stories. Which moment scared you most? Share your theory about the Strigoi. The water in Tyler Dawson's canteen was still warm. Amanda Castellano held the aluminum container in her gloved hand, feeling the residual heat through the fabric. 48 hours. That's how long Tyler had been missing, according to the initial report. 48 hours in October, temperatures that hadn't climbed above 45 degrees all week. The laws of thermodynamics didn't negotiate. Water lost heat, metal conducted cold, and nothing stayed warm for 2 days in the Hoh rainforest. She set the canteen down on the camp stove with deliberate care, as if the gentle contact might reveal some rational explanation her training had overlooked. The morning mist hung between the Sitka spruces like suspended animation, droplets catching on the sword ferns that carpeted the forest floor. Olympic National Park in autumn existed in a state of perpetual dampness, where everything smelled of decomposition and rebirth happening simultaneously. Tyler's camp occupied a flat area roughly 30 yards from the Hoh River Trail, positioned with the precision of someone who'd backpacked these mountains before. The tent, a North Face 2-person model, sat properly staked and rainfly secured. His pack leaned against a deadfall cedar, contents apparently undisturbed. The bear canister remained locked, food supplies intact. His Garmin GPS sat on a flat stone beside the extinguished fire ring, battery indicator showing 73% charge. Amanda had been a ranger in Olympic for 6 years, long enough to develop an instinct for which missing person cases would resolve themselves and which ones wouldn't. Tyler Dawson's scene felt wrong in ways that bypassed her analytical mind and lodged somewhere more primitive. She'd investigated dozens of abandoned campsites. People got spooked by wildlife, by weather, by the sudden realization that they didn't actually enjoy being alone in the wilderness. They left behind chaos, gear scattered, food opened and abandoned, tents collapsed in hasty departures. Tyler had left behind order. Meticulous, intentional order. She activated her Motorola radio. "Station, this is Castellano. I'm at the PLS for Dawson. Site is intact. Too intact. Requesting you run a background check on our missing person. I need to know if he has outdoor experience." The radio hissed static before dispatch supervisor Karen Thornton's voice came through. "Copy that. Stand by." Amanda circled the campsite, documenting with her digital camera while her analytical mind cataloged inconsistencies. The tent zipper was closed from the outside, not something you did if you planned to return quickly. His hiking boots sat just inside the tent's vestibule, laces loosened but not removed. She lifted the tent flap, careful not to contaminate the scene further, and photographed the interior. The sleeping bag lay partially unzipped, as if someone had climbed out. A book, a worn paperback copy of Edward Abbey's Desert Solitaire, rested spine up on the sleeping pad, a corner folded to mark page 73. His headlamp hung from the tent's interior loop, switched off. Everything suggested a person who'd stepped out for a moment and simply never returned. Except for the photographs. They were scattered across the sleeping bag's surface, maybe 24 of them, all Polaroids. Amanda carefully collected them with gloved hands, laying them out on a flat section of granite near the tent. The images showed the same scene from slightly different angles. A section of forest roughly a quarter mile from here, identifiable by the distinctive double-trunked western hemlock that marked the junction where the Hoh River Trail intersected with the old miner's path. But it was the figure in the photographs that made Amanda's breath catch. In each image, partially obscured by mist and distance, stood a woman in what appeared to be a white dress or robe. Long dark hair obscured her face, hanging forward in a way that seemed to defy gravity. The figure appeared in the same location in every photograph, but her position shifted subtly, closer in each successive image, as if the photographer had been documenting an approach. Amanda checked the camera settings visible on the last few photos. Timestamps ran from 11:47 p.m. to 12:33 a.m., October 23rd, into the 24th. 2 nights ago. Her radio crackled. Castellano, this is Thornton. Your missing person is Tyler James Dawson, age 31, Seattle address. According to his emergency contact, a sister, he's an experienced backpacker, has a degree in forestry from University of Washington, worked as a consulting arborist. She says he came out here specifically to photograph something, wouldn't tell her what. Copy that. Did she say anything else? A pause. She said he'd been having nightmares about a woman with black hair. Amanda felt something cold settle in her chest. Not fear, she told herself, but the recognition that this case had just complicated itself beyond a simple search and rescue operation. She looked back at the Polaroids spread across the granite, at the figure moving incrementally closer through the frames like stop-motion animation. Station, I'm going to follow Tyler's likely route based on these photographs. The subject matter suggests he was investigating something specific along the Miners Path junction. I'll check in every 30 minutes. Negative, Castellano. Protocol requires a partner for extended backcountry search. Wait for backup. How long? Sullivan's 3 hours out minimum. Amanda looked at the warm canteen, at the photographs, at the meticulous campsite that screamed wrongness despite its perfect order. 3 hours could be the difference between finding Tyler Dawson alive and recovering a body. Her mind began constructing rational frameworks. Hypothermia could cause confusion, lead someone to remove clothing, to behave erratically. Wildlife attacks happened, though rarely. Suicide, though the scene showed no indication of that mindset, but none of those explanations accounted for the photographs. None of them explained the systematic documentation of something in the forest that Tyler had apparently traveled here specifically to find. Station, I'm marking the site and proceeding. I'll maintain radio contact. She could hear Thornton's resigned sigh through the static. Copy. Be careful out there. Amanda secured Tyler's site with fluorescent flagging tape, took final photographs, and shouldered her SAR pack. The Garmin GPS on her belt showed the Miners Path junction at bearing 247 degrees, approximately 0.4 miles through old-growth forest. She set out, following the faint game trail that Tyler had likely used. The Hoh rainforest pressed in with the weight of centuries. Nurse logs the size of cars lay decomposing beneath canopies so dense that the morning sun penetrated as mere suggestion. Moss grew on every surface, emerald, chartreuse, deep forest green, transforming the landscape into something primordial. The air tasted of copper and earth, of water perpetually moving through organic matter. Amanda had always loved this forest's logic. Every organism served a function in the cycle. The salmon died and fed the soil nourished the giants fell and became gardens for the next generation. It was brutal and beautiful and completely comprehensible. Nature operated by rules that her scientific training could parse and predict. The woman in Tyler's photographs didn't fit any pattern Amanda recognized. She reached the junction in 18 minutes, immediately identifying the double-trunked hemlock from the Polaroids. The clearing here was perhaps 20 feet across, where some long-ago windfall had created space for undergrowth to flourish. Salal and Oregon grape competed for light beneath the canopy gap. Amanda stood in approximately the same position from which Tyler must have taken his photographs, orienting herself by comparing the tree angles. The woman, if there had been a woman, would have been standing roughly 30 feet ahead, near a cluster of old stumps that marked where logging operations had reached in the 1970s, before the park expansion halted commercial extraction. She walked forward slowly, eyes scanning for any physical evidence. The ground here was soft with accumulated needles and decomposed wood, holding impressions poorly. No clear footprints, no fabric caught on branches. No. She stopped. There, driven into the largest stump at chest height, was a butcher's knife. Not rusted, not weathered. The blade gleamed as if recently sharpened, sunk 3 inches into the rotting wood. Amanda photographed it from multiple angles before attempting to remove it. The handle was simple black polymer, the kind sold at any outdoor supply store. No distinguishing marks, but carved into the stump's surface, surrounding the knife in a rough circle, were characters Amanda didn't recognize. Not English, not Spanish, not any Latin alphabet. The carving was fresh enough that sap still wept from the cuts, done within the last few days, certainly. She photographed these extensively, knowing she'd need to consult references she didn't have access to in the field. Station Castellano. I found evidence at the junction. A knife and what appears to be writing in an Asian language, possibly Japanese. Need you to contact our park anthropologist, Dr. Richardson, if he's available, and send him images for translation. Copy. Transmitting now. Amanda transferred the photos to Thornton via their digital link, then turned her attention back to the clearing. If Tyler had come here because of the woman in his photographs, and if he'd left this knife as some kind of offering or ward, or... Her radio made a sound she'd never heard before. Not static exactly, but a wet, crackling interference that raised every hair on her arms. Through the noise came a voice, female, speaking in a language Amanda couldn't identify, the syllables running together in a rhythm that bypassed meaning and communicated something more fundamental than words. Anger, grief, accusation. The transmission lasted perhaps 5 seconds before cutting to normal static. Station? Thornton, did you catch that? Catch what? Your signal cut out for a moment. Are you okay? Amanda's heart rate had spiked, her body responding to some threat her rational mind refused to acknowledge. I'm fine. Did you receive any kind of interference on your end? Negative. Just lost your transmission briefly. What's your status? She forced her breathing to steady. Radio interference happened constantly in the mountains. Iron deposits, atmospheric conditions, solar activity. There were a dozen rational explanations for what she'd heard. Except she hadn't heard it through the radio speaker. She'd heard it inside her head. Status is proceeding with grid search from the junction. We'll report in 30. Amanda began a systematic search pattern, working in expanding spirals from the stump. The forest yielded nothing but its usual debris, fallen branches, decomposing logs, the scattered detritus of a healthy ecosystem. No signs of human passage beyond the main trail, no blood, no struggle indicators, no Tyler Dawson. She was completing her second circuit when she noticed the temperature dropping. It happened too quickly to be natural, from 45 degrees to what felt like near freezing in the span of a minute. Her breath began fogging despite the hour approaching noon. Frost appeared on the sword ferns, delicate crystalline patterns spreading across the fronds like time-lapse video. Amanda pulled her thermal layer from her pack, hands shaking, not from cold, but from the sheer impossibility of what she was observing. October temperatures in a temperate rainforest didn't drop 30 degrees in 60 seconds. The laws of thermodynamics. Her radio emitted that sound again, the wet organic static that wasn't static at all, and beneath it or within it or somehow simultaneous with it, that female voice speaking syllables that carried meaning through pure emotional resonance. The words were mourning and rage twisted together, a sound that human vocal cords shouldn't be able to produce. And then Amanda saw her. 30 feet away, exactly where Tyler's photographs had positioned her, stood a woman in white. Amanda's analytical mind immediately began cataloging details, desperate to find rational explanation. 5'4" approximately, long black hair hanging forward, obscuring facial features. White garment that could be a robe or kimono or burial shroud. Not moving, not breathing, just standing with that impossible stillness that living things never achieve. Hello? Amanda's voice sounded pathetically small in the suddenly silent forest. Are you hurt? Do you need assistance? The figure didn't respond. Didn't acknowledge her in any way. Amanda took 3 steps forward, hand moving to the canister of bear spray on her belt. Not because she thought this was a bear, but because her body needed to take some action. Any action, to combat the paralysis that threatened to overtake rational thought. The woman's head tilted, not like a human considering something, but like a doll manipulated by inexpert hands. The angle too extreme, held too long. And then she was closer. Not walking closer, just suddenly closer, as if the space between them had contracted without the figure moving through it, now 15 feet away instead of 30. And Amanda could see that the white garment was indeed a kimono, traditional Japanese design, and that the hair hanging forward wasn't merely obscuring the woman's face, but seemed to have a mass and quality beyond normal hair. Too thick, too dark, moving in the complete absence of wind. Amanda's radio began emitting a continuous stream of that wet, static voice, and she realized with dawning horror that it wasn't her radio at all. The sound was coming from the forest itself, from the air, from inside her own head, a transmission that required no electronic medium. She ran. Her SAR training screamed at her that running from wildlife was the worst possible response, that you maintained eye contact and backed away slowly and never turned your back. But her hindbrain had made the calculation that this wasn't wildlife, that normal rules didn't apply, and that her only chance of survival lay in putting distance between herself and the thing that couldn't possibly exist. Amanda crashed through the undergrowth, her Garmin GPS bouncing against her hip, branches whipping at her face. Behind her, through the roaring of blood in her ears, she heard, or thought she heard, or imagined she heard, the sound of footsteps that didn't follow the rhythm of walking, but came in impossible bursts, close, then far, then closer again. She burst back onto the main trail and nearly collided with a hiker, an elderly man in high-end Columbia gear, looking startled by her sudden appearance. "Are you all right?" he asked, concern evident in his weathered face. Amanda spun, looking back toward the junction. Empty forest, normal October temperatures, the sound of the Hoh River in the distance providing its steady white noise. Her breath came in ragged gasps, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Did you see?" She stopped. What could she possibly say? Did you see the impossible woman? Did you hear the voice that speaks in grief and rage? See what? Amanda forced herself to calm, to access the professional training that had carried her through dozens of difficult situations. "I'm Park Ranger Castellano. There's a missing person case active in this area. Have you encountered anyone else on the trail this morning?" "Just you. I've been hiking since dawn, came up from the visitor center, seen some deer, heard an elk bugling, but no people." He studied her face. "You sure you're okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." The word landed with weight Amanda hadn't expected. "I'm fine, just startled by some wildlife. Please be aware there's an active search in progress. If you see anything unusual, report it to the ranger station." She managed to extract herself from the conversation and made her way back toward Tyler's campsite, maintaining what she hoped was a professional pace, while every instinct screamed to run until she reached civilization. Her analytical mind kept trying to process what had happened, to find frameworks that could contain the experience. Hallucination brought on by stress, carbon monoxide poisoning from faulty camp stove, some kind of psychoactive spore released by fungi in the area. Visual pareidolia combined with suggestion from Tyler's photographs. Each explanation felt thin, inadequate, a band-aid on a wound that required surgery. She reached Tyler's campsite and stopped dead. The tent was open. She'd closed and secured it. She was certain of that. Had photographed the closed zipper, had documented the sealed site. Now it hung open, the flap pushed aside from the interior, as if someone had just crawled out. And arranged across the granite where she'd laid out Tyler's Polaroids were new photographs. These weren't Polaroids but printed images, the kind you'd get from a digital camera and portable printer. They showed Amanda herself at the junction, photographed from approximately where the woman in white had been standing. In the first image, Amanda was examining the knife in the stump. In the second, she was speaking into her radio. In the third, she was turning toward the camera, her face clearly visible, expression shifting from analytical focus to the beginnings of fear. Someone had been watching her, photographing her. While she'd been investigating Tyler's disappearance, someone had been documenting hers. Amanda's hand went to her radio, but she hesitated. What would she report? That an impossible woman had appeared and disappeared? That photographs of her had manifested at a secured scene? Every rational instinct she possessed screamed that there had to be explanation. Hidden cameras, an accomplice, elaborate prank or worse, criminal activity. But the cold, the temperature drop that violated thermodynamics, the way the figure had moved without moving, had closed distance without traversing space. Her radio crackled with normal static. Castellano, this is Thornton. Dr. Richardson identified those characters you sent. It's Japanese, old form. He says it's a Buddhist mantra for binding restless spirits, used in funeral rites to prevent the deceased from returning. Amanda's mouth had gone dry. Did he say anything else? Yeah. He wants to know where you found it because whoever carved that was either deeply knowledgeable about historical Japanese burial practices or was copying something they didn't understand. The syntax is grammatically perfect for the Heian period. The Heian period. Amanda's undergraduate Asian Studies minor flickered to life, roughly 794 to 1185 AD. The era when most of Japan's ghost folklore had crystallized into the forms that persisted through modern culture. Station, I need you to run a deeper background on Tyler Dawson, specifically any connections to Japanese culture or history, and check if there have been any other disappearances in Olympic National Park with similar characteristics. Define similar characteristics. Amanda looked at the photographs of herself laid out on the stone, at the open tent she'd secured, at the forest pressing in with its weight of secrets. Unexplained, impossible, wrong. The next few hours passed in a haze of activity that felt increasingly dissociative from reality. Backup arrived, Derek Sullivan, a ranger she'd worked with for 3 years, solid and rational and exactly the kind of presence that should have grounded her. She showed him the site, the photographs, the evidence that refused to conform to any reasonable investigation framework. Sullivan approached it with the methodical professionalism she'd expected. He documented everything, maintained chain of custody for evidence, called in a full SAR team to expand the search grid. By late afternoon, they had 8 rangers and 12 volunteers combing a 2-mile radius from Tyler's camp. They found nothing. No trace of Tyler Dawson beyond the original campsite. No footprints, no disturbed vegetation, no blood evidence, no indication of where a grown man who'd been experienced enough to set up a proper camp could have vanished to. Amanda found herself unable to tell Sullivan about the woman in white, about the temperature drop, about the certainty that had seized her body, that she was in the presence of something that shouldn't exist. Each time she approached the topic, her mouth refused to form the words, as if speaking the experience aloud would solidify it into something that couldn't be rationalized away. By dusk, the search was suspended until morning. SR protocol. You didn't risk searchers in the dark for someone who'd been missing 48 hours already. Amanda should have hiked back to the ranger station with the others, should have filed her reports and slept in her own bed and approached this fresh in the morning with the armor of daylight and coffee and procedural distance. Instead, she found herself volunteering to maintain the scene overnight, to guard Tyler's campsite in case he returned, to stay where every instinct screamed at her to flee. Sullivan had looked at her strangely but hadn't argued. Radio check every hour. Anything unusual, you call it in immediately. Define unusual, Amanda had said, and tried to make it sound like a joke. Now she sat beside her own tent, pitched 20 yards from Tyler's, as Olympic National Park transitioned from twilight to full dark. The forest sounds shifted with the darkness, daybirds falling silent, nighttime creatures emerging, the temperature dropping further into genuine October cold. Amanda had brought her laptop, intending to research while maintaining her vigil. The satellite hotspot gave her fragile connection to the outside world, and she used it to dive into databases she normally wouldn't access outside the office. Missing persons in Olympic National Park, dating back 20 years. She filtered for unexplained cases, for victims who'd vanished without trace, and found a pattern that made her stomach clench. 7 people in the last decade. 4 men, 3 women, ages ranging from 23 to 58. All experienced hikers, all solo camping, all last seen in the Hoh rainforest sector. And according to the supplementary notes that most people wouldn't bother reading, all had reported nightmares before their final trips. Nightmares about a woman with long black hair. Amanda cross-referenced the dates. The disappearances clustered around the October new moon, falling within a 3-day window every year. She checked her calendar. Tonight was October 26th. New moon. The thermal pattern wasn't coincidence. The nightmares weren't hysteria. Tyler Dawson had come here knowing what he was looking for, and Amanda had stumbled into following the same path. Her research led her down rabbit holes of Japanese folklore, through academic articles about yurei, vengeful spirits of those who died in rage or sorrow, unable to rest until their grievance was addressed. The articles described manifestations that aligned exactly with what Amanda had witnessed: the white burial kimono, the long black hair obscuring the face, the impossible movement through space, the associated temperature drops. But yurei were supposed to be tied to Japan, to specific locations where trauma had occurred. What was an onryo, the most dangerous form of yurei, the vengeance ghost, doing in an Olympic National Park rainforest thousands of miles from its cultural origin? Amanda found the answer in a Seattle Times article from 1952, archived in the university database she was able to access through the park's research credentials. Japanese internment. During World War II, before Executive Order 9266 forced Japanese Americans into camps, some families had attempted to flee into the wilderness to avoid detention. One group of 8, the Nakamura family according to records, had disappeared into Olympic National Forest in March 1942. Their bodies were found in November of that year by hunters, all dead from exposure, starvation, and what the medical examiners report vaguely termed trauma consistent with violence. The youngest victim was 17-year-old Emiko Nakamura, whose body showed signs of assault before death. No one was ever charged. The case was buried in the chaos of wartime, dismissed as tragedy compounded by tragedy, and eventually forgotten by everyone except, apparently, Emiko Nakamura herself. Amanda stared at the grainy photograph accompanying the article. Emiko looked out from 70 years of distance, young face, traditional hairstyle, wearing what might have been her best kimono for the photographer. In her eyes was something Amanda recognized from her own mirror, a fierce intelligence, analytical and uncompromising. The woman who became something that refused to rest. Amanda's radio crackled with normal static. Castellano, hourly check. Status? She should report. Should tell Thornton everything. The research, the pattern, the impossibility she'd witnessed. Instead, she heard herself say, status normal. No sign of Dawson. Continuing overnight watch. Copy. Stay sharp out there. The radio fell silent, and Amanda was alone with the forest and her growing certainty that she understood exactly what had happened to Tyler Dawson. He'd come here because the nightmares had driven him to, because Emiko Nakamura's rage had reached across death and distance to summon him, as she'd summoned 6 others before him, as she was now summoning Amanda herself. But why? If this was vengeance for injustice, why target random hikers who had nothing to do with 1942, with internment, with the violence that had ended a 17-year-old girl's life in this forest? The answer came not from research, but from instinct, from the analytical pattern recognition that had made Amanda excel at her work. Emiko wasn't targeting random hikers. She was targeting people who resembled someone, who fit a profile. Amanda pulled up photos of the other victims from the missing persons files. All of them were white. All of them were alone. All of them were approximately military age, late 20s to early 40s, like the men who'd killed her. Amanda's thermal layer did nothing against the cold that crept through her core. This wasn't random haunting or aimless rage. This was systematic, targeted vengeance enacted across decades against surrogates for the murderers who'd escaped justice. And Tyler Dawson, 31 years old, white, male, military build according to his driver's license photo, had fit the pattern perfectly, as did Derek Sullivan, as did 3 other rangers on the SAR team. The forest had grown profoundly silent, the kind of absence of sound that signaled a predator's presence. Amanda's hands moved automatically, checking her gear. Headlamp, radio, bear spray, the useless Glock 22 that park rangers carried for wildlife threats, but which she suspected would be equally useless against what stalked these woods. Her laptop screen flickered. Not a power issue, the battery showed full charge. But the display began showing interference patterns, and through the digital noise emerged an image that couldn't be coming from her hard drive. Emiko Nakamura's face, but not from the 1952 photograph. This was Emiko as she must have appeared at the moment of death. Face pale as ash, hair wild and loose, eyes carrying an expression of such concentrated hatred that Amanda had to look away from the screen. And then she heard it. The wet, organic sound that her radio had made, but louder now, coming from the forest itself. The voice speaking in Japanese. Amanda didn't understand the words, but their meaning transmitted directly into her hindbrain. Rage, grief, accusation, demand. She forced herself to stand, to face the darkness beyond her tense LED lantern. "Emiko? Is that who you are? Emiko Nakamura?" The forest absorbed her words without echo. "I know what happened to you," Amanda continued, her voice steadier than she felt. "I know about 1942. I know you were murdered, that no one paid for it, that justice failed you." The temperature dropped another 10 degrees. Frost spread across the ground in visible patterns, forming characters. Japanese characters, the same binding mantra she'd seen carved into the stump. But these appeared in ice crystals on the forest floor. Warnings or wards, or perhaps the only words that remained of Emiko's humanity. "Tyler Dawson didn't kill you," Amanda said. "The men who did are dead now, all dead, and they died without punishment, but they're still dead. Vengeance against people who weren't even born when you died. That's not justice. That's just more tragedy." A figure materialized between the trees, not gradually, not emerging from shadow, simply present where nothing had been a moment before. Emiko in her white kimono, hair hanging forward, standing with that terrible motionless that the dead achieve. Amanda's hand moved to her radio, but she forced herself to stop. What would backup do? How do you arrest a ghost? How do you rescue someone from vengeance that had been brewing for 70 years? "I can't give you justice," Amanda said, and the admission felt like defeat. "The people responsible are beyond any punishment I could deliver. But I can give you recognition. I can tell your story. I can make sure you're not forgotten." The figure moved closer, that impossible movement that bypassed normal space. And Amanda could see details that her mind had refused to process during their first encounter. The kimono wasn't just white, but showed stains that might have been mud, or might have been blood. The hands hanging at Emiko's side showed finger positions that looked wrong, broken, set improperly in death. And the face behind that curtain of hair was visible now, just barely. Pale beyond any living pallor, lips blue-black, eyes holding depths that human eyes didn't possess. Amanda's voice came out as whisper. "What do you want?" Emiko raised one hand, the gesture slow, deliberate, pointing past Amanda toward Tyler's tent. And Amanda understood. She crossed to Tyler's campsite on legs that trembled despite her willpower, acutely aware of Emiko's presence following at a distance that never varied no matter how fast or slow Amanda moved. She reached the tent, pulled back the flap. Tyler Dawson sat inside. He was alive. Technically alive, Amanda corrected herself, because his chest moved with respiration and his eyes tracked her movement. But something fundamental had vacated those eyes, leaving behind a shell that breathed and saw but didn't truly live. "Tyler," Amanda kept her voice gentle. "I'm Ranger Castellano. We've been searching for you. Can you hear me?" No response. Tyler's gaze moved past her to where Emiko stood at the tent's threshold, and his expression shifted to recognition, combined with something that might have been relief or might have been resignation. Amanda understood then. This was the pattern. The nightmares drove them here, Emiko manifested, and something in that encounter broke them. Not killed them, because death would have been mercy, but fractured whatever made them human, left them alive but absent, ghosts of their own making trapped in flesh. "You can't do this," Amanda said, turning to face Emiko. "Whatever was done to you was evil, but creating more victims doesn't balance that scale. It just adds more pain to a world that already has too much." Emiko's head tilted, that same puppet-like angle that violated normal human range of motion. And Amanda heard her voice for the first time without electronic or atmospheric interference. Speaking in English, not Japanese, the words carrying an accent from another era. They laughed. 2 words, infinite weight. They laughed while they... Emiko's form flickered, briefly showing the 17-year-old girl from the photograph before snapping back to the pale specter. While my brothers died protecting me, while my mother begged, they laughed and then they... The sentence didn't finish because some traumas defied language. Amanda felt tears on her face, felt the absolute inadequacy of anything she could say or do in the face of such profound injustice. I believe you, and I'm sorry. I'm so deeply sorry that the world failed you so completely. Sorry isn't justice. No, Amanda agreed. It's not, but neither is this. You're taking people who never hurt you, destroying them because they resemble the men who did. That's not vengeance. That's becoming the very thing that was done to you, perpetuating the cycle. Emiko's form solidified, becoming more real, more present, and Amanda could see her now as she must have been. Intelligent, fierce, analytical like Amanda herself, someone who would have questioned and challenged and refused easy answers. What would be enough? Amanda asked. What would let you rest? The question seemed to surprise Emiko, or surprise what remained of Emiko behind 70 years of rage and grief. Her expression shifted, confusion mixing with the hatred, and for a moment Amanda saw the girl who died, terrified and furious in these woods. I want them punished, Emiko said, and her voice carried the crack of suppressed tears. Ghosts crying, Amanda thought distantly, another impossibility. I want them to suffer as I suffered. They're dead. You can't punish the dead. Then I'll punish the living. I'll punish everyone who resembles them, who carries their privilege, who walks free in the world they stole from me. Amanda took a breath, made her decision. Then take me. The forest seemed to hold its breath. Not Tyler, Amanda continued. Not anyone else. But if you need a surrogate to punish, take me. I'm a white park ranger in a federal uniform. I represent everything that failed you. The government that imprisoned your family. The officials who buried your case. The system that valued your lives so little that your murders didn't even warrant investigation. Emiko moved closer, and Amanda forced herself not to retreat, not to flee from the cold that radiated from this impossible presence. She could feel frost forming on her eyelashes, could taste metal in her mouth, could sense her body beginning to shut down in response to proximity to something that violated every natural law. You would volunteer? Emiko's voice carried wonder beneath the rage. If it means you stop, if it means no one else ends up like Tyler, yes. You're not like them. I'm exactly like them in every way that matters to your vengeance. I'm alive and white and benefit from the same structures that enabled what was done to you. Emiko's hand rose, reached toward Amanda's face. The touch when it came felt like frostbite and electricity combined, like death itself making contact with living flesh. Amanda gasped, but didn't pull away, didn't run. Maintained eye contact with eyes that held depths no human should be able to perceive. And Emiko saw her. Not just surface appearance, but deeper. Amanda's memories, her choices, her own relationship with injustice and grief. The analytical mind that questioned authority, that couldn't rest when patterns didn't make sense, that fought, however imperfectly, to protect rather than exploit. You believe things can be better, Emiko said, and it wasn't quite accusation. I have to believe that, Amanda replied. Otherwise, what's the point of any of this? If vengeance is the only response to injustice, if we just perpetuate cycles of harm, then they won. The people who hurt you, they win by making the world worse, by making you become like them. The cold intensified until Amanda couldn't feel her extremities, until her vision began tunneling, until she was certain she was dying. Not killed, but offering herself as sacrifice to break a cycle that had claimed too many already. And then it stopped. Emiko stepped back, her form beginning to lose solidity. I'm tired, she said, and the rage had drained from her voice, leaving only exhaustion. So tired of being angry, of remembering, of existing only as pain. Then rest, Amanda whispered through numb lips. You've carried this long enough, let it go, let yourself go. How? After everything, how do I just stop? Amanda thought of the binding mantra carved into the stump, of the Buddhist funeral rites meant to let spirits rest. You have to forgive, not the people who hurt you. They don't deserve forgiveness. But forgive yourself for dying, for not being able to stop them, for existing as this instead of the person you should have been. Emiko's face became visible fully now, no longer obscured by hair, and Amanda saw she'd been beautiful. Intelligent eyes, strong features, someone who would have changed the world if given the chance. Tears tracked down her pale cheeks, and Amanda realized with shock that they were red. Blood tears, the final substance a body could weep. I wanted to study literature, Emiko said. American literature, Fitzgerald, Abbey. I wanted to understand this country that my parents chose. Instead, I understood only its capacity for cruelty. I know, Amanda said, and did. I know what was stolen from you, and I can't give it back. But I can tell your story. I can make sure people remember Emiko Nakamura as she was, not just as what she became. Would that be enough? The forest had begun to lighten. Not dawn yet, but pre-dawn, the space between night and day where ghosts were said to have the most power. Emiko looked toward the growing light with an expression that might have been longing. Tell them I wasn't always this, she said finally. Tell them I loved words. I loved the rain. I loved my family. Tell them I died terrified and furious. But I lived as more than that. I will, Amanda promised. I swear I will. Emiko's form became translucent, the dawn light beginning to penetrate her substance. The others, the ones I took, they're not dead, just lost. You'll find them. Tell them I'm sorry. I will. And Tyler Dawson specifically, Emiko's voice was fading, becoming wind through branches. Tell him I'm sorry he had Edward Abbey's taste in literature. I was never fond of desert writers myself. And then she was gone. Not dramatically. Not with spectacle. Simply absent where she'd been present, leaving behind only slightly warmer air and the sense of something profound having shifted in the fabric of the world. Amanda stood alone in the pre-dawn forest, Tyler Dawson emerging from his tent behind her with confused eyes but present. Truly present, for the first time since she'd found him. The cold was normal October cold. The forest sounds had returned, morning birds beginning tentative songs, distant elk bugling, the eternal white noise of the Hoh River. She activated her radio. Station, this is Castellano. I have Tyler Dawson. He's alive and appears unharmed. Request immediate medical evac and I need to file a report. A complicated report. Copy that. Excellent work, Ranger. How did you find him? Amanda looked at where Emiko had stood, at the frost patterns melting from the ground, at Tyler who was staring around the forest as if seeing it for the first time. I listened, she said finally, to a story that needed telling. The next few days passed in a blur of debriefings, medical evaluations, and the carefully worded report Amanda filed that managed to be entirely truthful while omitting anything that would get her flagged for psychiatric evaluation. Tyler recovered fully, claiming amnesia for his time missing, a claim Amanda didn't dispute. The other 6 victims were found within the week, all alive, all disoriented, all found in the same section of forest where they'd vanished. Amanda kept her promise. She researched the Nakamura family extensively, contacted historical societies and Japanese American advocacy groups, and compiled a comprehensive record of what had happened in 1942. She gave talks at park visitor centers, wrote articles for historical journals, ensured that Emiko's name appeared in records not as footnote but as person, and sometimes hiking alone in the Hoh rainforest during October new moons, Amanda would pause at the junction with the double-trunked hemlock and speak to the silence. Update on her work, thoughts on justice and memory, acknowledgement of the girl who should have lived to study American literature instead of becoming a cautionary tale about unhealed trauma. The forest never answered, but the silence felt different now, less oppressive, more peaceful, carrying the weight of rest rather than rage. And on those nights, When Amanda returned to her tent and slept, she never dreamed of women with long black hair. Instead, she dreamed of a 17-year-old girl reading Edward Abbey in the rain, laughing at descriptions of desert landscapes while surrounded by the wettest forest on the continent, alive with possibilities and fury and hope. The dreams felt like gift rather than curse. Felt like Emiko saying, "I existed. Remember I existed as more than pain." And Amanda did. She remembered. Hope you felt genuine terror. If you appreciate authentic horror rooted in real folklore, consider following for more stories. Which moment scared you most? Share your theory about what happened.